It's preparing.
Yeah, I'm getting the message that we're now streaming live on YouTube, Chairman, so over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. Let's get the right page up. Good evening and welcome to this online meeting of the Local Plan Committee on Monday the 24th of August. I'm Councillor Nick Barlow, I'm Councillor for Castle Ward and I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. This meeting is being broadcast live via Zoom over the internet on the Council's YouTube channel and will also be available to watch afterwards. To begin, I've got a few matters of housekeeping. With the exception of the Democratic Services Officers, that's Jan Mooney, Richard Clifford and Owen Howell, who are advising us, would all participants all please mute their microphones unless you're invited to speak. I'll ask for each item of business to be presented and then ask each member of the panel in turn if they wish to ask a question or comment. At the end of each item of business, the Democratic Services Officer will ask each panel member in turn to confirm audibly how they wish to vote. If we're still going at 8 o'clock, we may take a short break then, depending on how we're doing on that. So I'll now go through and ask each member of the committee to identify themselves. So I'm Councillor Nick Barlow, Chair of the committee and Councillor for Castle Ward. So I'll go through the order I've got you on my screen. So Councillor Hayter.
Good evening, Councillor Chris Hayter from St Anne's St John's.
Thank you. Councillor Moore.
Councillor Patricia Moore, West Mercia and Pyfleet.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis.
Councillor Andrew Ellis, representing Markstay and Layer Ward.
Yeah, Councillor Scordis.
Lee Scordis, Deputy Chair and Old Heath, Hythe and Rowhedge.
Councillor Bourne.
Good evening, Councillor Tina Bourne, representing Greensted Ward.
Councillor Willits.
Dennis Willits, Lexton and Braeswick Ward, substituting for Councillor Barber.
And Councillor Luxford Vaughan.
Good evening, Chair. Councillor Luxford Vaughan, Wivenhoe Ward, substituting for Phil Coleman tonight.
I think that was all the members of the committee. There are other councillors present. They're here to speak on one or more items, and they'll be introduced when it comes to that point in the meeting. Yes,
Chairman, you might just want to record Councillor Oxford's apologies.
Oh, thank you. Yes, sorry, Richard. Yes, yes, do have to record apologies from Councillor Gerard Oxford. He's having some IT and connection issues, so he's unfortunately unable to join us this evening. And as I said, we're also joined by the Democratic Services Officers, Jan Mooney, Richard Clifford, and Owen Howell, who are here to help with the procedural matters, things like that, when I forget them. So that's item 1. Item 2 is substitutions. We've already had those in the introductions. Councillor Luxford Vaughan is substituting for Councillor Coleman and Councillor Willits is substituting for Councillor Barber. Item 3, urgent items. We don't have any scheduled for this meeting. Item 4, declarations of interest. Do any members of the panel have any declarations of interest they need to make in any items that are on the agenda this evening? I'm taking that silence and lack of raised hands as a no, so we can now move on to the next item, which is the general have your say. We have Councillor Lilly and Councillor Corey. We also have a have your say that's been submitted in writing by a member of the public, Patricia Beach. As that refers specifically to item 7 on the agenda, we'll take that then. But now we'll take first Councillor Lilly and then Councillor Corey. So, Councillor Lilly.
Thank you, Chair. It's very good evening. Good evening, everybody. And thanks for allowing me to speak and have your say. I'm here to just have my say on the white paper proposal, or as people are starting to call it now, a developer's charter to build anywhere at any time on anything. It really is a worrying white paper, and going through it, it's fairly obvious that this will give all the developers a real good chance to build on all those sites that we have rejected over the years, where prospective and developers especially the ones that are very active around Colchester. They've all tried to build in all our areas. We had one down in Roe Hedge, and it's a worry that it might come back under the new guidance. So what I'm trying to is to ask the committee tonight is that this is going to affect all councillors in all our areas, and it must be a worry to you as well as me. So what we need our 3 MPs to speak up against this white paper in what they propose. Without their support, we're going to be really struggling. Over the years, everybody has complained about the lack of infrastructure and the fact that we are building far too many homes. But under this proposals, we're going to build even more homes than what we had before. And how are we going to stop it? We all need to work together on this in all areas, all political parties, and with those 3 MPs on board. And we need to speak up as one voice to stop this, because it is going to be horrendous for Colchester and for all the borough and all our rural areas that have a lot of Conservative councillors in. Then you're going to be effective. You think Mersey Island is overdeveloped now, just wait till you see what happens in the future and how we're going to stop it. But it's just a plea really to the plan tonight. Could the local plan committee write to our 3 MPs to ask them to reject all the white paper and to make a complete U-turn on that? We'll be doing this in full council, I believe, but it would help for a bit of extra power to our elbow, so to speak, if the local plan committee also backed it tonight. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Like I said, we'll be discussing this in more detail when we get to item 9, but we'll take note of your comments and feed them into the discussion then. Councillor Corey.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you for letting me speak. And I do have to go to another meeting, so I will leave shortly after this. So unfortunately, you won't hear all your discussion, but I will listen back. So first of all, I thank contributors who have spoken to me about this issue. The white paper is what I'm going to talk about, item 9. I really think the government have got this wrong. I think for us on this committee and for residents, they'll understand why if we can explain to them how much this will affect our planning laws, the bread and butter that you understand, councillors, whether you're on the local plan or on the planning committee. Councillor Mike Linney covers planning, and Julie Young as portfolio holder will be here to talk about this issue later. We all understand, whether we're cabinet members or backbenchers or people who sit on the planning committee, how much and how important it is that we get this work right. Planning applications coming in, sorting them in the right way, ensuring that local residents get involved, and it is local democracy that steers how our planning should go. So these proposals in this white paper called Planning for the Future, it really flies in the face of local residents and local democracy. And there's a double whammy if you add together the possible formula and the possible housing numbers. One calculation suggests 1,600 for Colchester, which will be unacceptable. And primarily, if you park that for now, it is the change to the planning law on top of planning changes that have already happened under this Conservative government. I worry it's gone too far, and this will take it even further. We know about permitted development and how that's led to flat blocks without windows and things that would not be acceptable in a modern, progressive, well-organized planning system. So to go even further really concerns me, and we'd be handing over to developers a blank canvas, and they'll be able to push things through with the categories that are talked about in the report, where you could have areas for growth or renewal, which really mean development is just presumed to go ahead without enough local say. So I'm really concerned about the possible changes in this white paper, and I know we will come together and we will make the right decisions and put forward in the consultation response how strongly we all feel. So I wanted to to hear more from the committee tonight. As I say, I have to go to another meeting. But I do want to really say that we need to come together on this and reject the changes, because residents complain to us about planning, and developers too. For developers, they don't think it's restrictive enough and they want it to be quicker. Whereas residents are the exact opposite. They don't understand why we can't stop certain developments, why we have to take certain housing numbers. And I'm on the side of the residents. I want to be able to protect our communities and our environment from overdevelopment. And I want to be able to explain why we can use planning enforcement to go after bad development. With these changes that the white paper would establish, we will not be able to plan properly in the first place and then enforce secondary to that. And I want to establish the fact that we've had so many cuts to our government grants over the years that does affect planning and it affects enforcement. And I do think that we need more resources actually in planning. We need more restrictions in order to be able to carry out something that is fair and equitable for all of our residents, to protect our borough across the patch from unwanted development and development that just doesn't apply to regulation. So I've said enough. I will listen to what I can do, and then I have to go to another meeting. But thank you, and please push back and make it very clear that Colchester understands what good planning is, and this white paper is not good planning. We need to tell this government it's got it wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. Yeah, we will take those into account when we get to item 9, your views. I would note as well that if you really do want to see more of our discussions and you can't make them because of your meeting, we will be on YouTube later on. So, you know, if there's nothing else you want to watch, then you can put this to the top of your queue. So yeah, thank you for those comments from Councillor Corey and Councillor Lilly. Like I said, we have one written submission from a member of the public as that relates specifically to item 7. I'm going to take it at the start then. So we'll now move on to item 6, which is the minutes from the last meeting. So before I just propose those for adoption, are there any questions, queries, comments, errors anyone's noticed in the minutes? Sorry. I'll take that as a no. So I'll propose that we adopt those minutes. Is that agreed? I see a general agreement there. I don't think we need to go to a named vote on that one. I think we've got no one standing up to oppose it. I think, yes, so minutes of the previous meeting are agreed. Item 7 is, hold on, so I find the right part here, the Colchester local list. We have the written representation from Patricia Beach, which I'll invite the Democratic Services Officer to read to the meeting, and then I'll ask Dr. Jess Tipper, the Archaeological Advisor, to present the report to the committee. So is that Jan?
Yes, I'm ready to roll.
Yes, whenever you're ready.
This is from Patricia Beach. Pardon me. She says, I am very pleased that the majority of the buildings and features identified in Marks Tay are being recommended for inclusion onto the local list. There is a slight disappointment that the former goods shed located at the station will not be one of these, because although I appreciate the building has been used for many functions since it was last used as a goods shed, the basic silhouette remains the same as when it was built in the 1840s. Underneath all those alterations, some of the original brickwork can still be found. Proposed building works for a bicycle park will result in a drastic change of the local skyline. Many of the buildings associated with Marks Tay Station have already been turned into rubble, such as the gasworks and the main entrance. It will be a shame to lose this last remaining large structure at the site. Fingers crossed the waiting room between platforms. Now what's happened to Councillor Luxon has just happened to me on my other screen. My apologies. So, fingers crossed the waiting room between platforms 2 and 3 will be the sole surviving building for many years to come. That's it.
Thank you for that, Jan. Now, Dr. Jess Tipper, if you could present the report, please.
Good evening, councillors. The Colchester local list safeguards selected heritage assets that are considered historically or architecturally important at a local level, are valued by the local community, and make a significant contribution to the character and setting of Colchester and the surrounding villages. The local list plays an important role in building and reinforcing a sense of local character and distinctiveness in the local historic environment. It enables the significance of any heritage assets on the list, referred to as non-designated heritage assets, to be better taken into account when planning applications are submitted. This is in accordance with National Planning Policy Framework, Historic England Advice Note 7, and also Colchester's adopted local plan. The Local Plan Committee is asked, firstly, to approve the proposed amendments to the adopted Colchester local list. In response to the press release and consultation, a total of 64 additions have been recommended for the local list. These are listed in Table 1 of the report. The nominations have been scrutinised by the Council's Historic Environment Officers against the Council's new local list selection criteria adopted last year. Of the total, 17 are within Colchester, 15 in Marks Tay, 4 in Fingering-Hoe and Great Tay, 3 in Boxted and West Mersey, 2 in Dedham, 8 Ash Green and Fordham, and 1 each in Abberton, Copford, East Mersey, Great Hawksley, Langham, Layer de la Haye, Messing, Mount Bures, Peldon, Rowhedge, Wakescole and West Bergholt. So in this report, we're starting to expand the local list outside of Colchester and Wivenhoe to the rest of the borough. There's a wide range of heritage assets nominated and recommended, including dwellings, barns, pillboxes, signposts, as well as below-ground archaeological remains. Some of these additions are categories of heritage asset and include multiple individual assets. I'd be pleased to answer specific questions relating to any of the assets in Table 1. Highlights for me include number 63, the fine water tower in West Mersey, and also in West Mersey, number 64, the World War II gun emplacements repurposed as coffee shops on the Victoria Esplanade. I should point out a typo here. It's the only remaining gun emplacement of its type in the county, not country. I also very much like number 61, which is a good local example of 19th century railway architecture just to the north of Wakescole. I'd like to draw your attention to numbers 6 to 12 in Colchester, which have been recorded by the Colchester Civic Society, and in particular through the efforts of Robert Mercer. Also numbers 45 to 60 have been identified during the neighbourhood plan process for Marks Tay, from the rigorous work of a local volunteer, Patricia Beach. Number 5 is a recommendation to add the entirety of the below-ground archaeological remains within the area of the wall town. This is because where they survive, those remains are equivalent status to designated archaeological remains or scheduled monuments, and they extend and are preserved below later buildings, car parks, roads, across the entire walled area. It's recommended that 3 nominations, numbers 41, 48 and 58, should be rejected, as strictly they do not meet the selection criteria. This is because they're quite common examples of their type, which have all been quite altered. There's insufficient information about another, number 51. In this case, it is recommended this should be rejected today and should be reviewed again if further information is provided. A closer inspection is required. The facade looks recent, but it could be covering an earlier timber frame building. The Local Plan Committee is also asked to approve the delegation of authority to the lead officer to add heritage assets to the local list for an interim period prior to ratification by the committee. This was discussed by the committee in October 2019. In particular, this is to allow heritage assets at immediate risk of damage to be added to the local list without delay. This will then be brought to the next Local Plan Committee for consideration and scrutiny, ratification or refusal. There's one such candidate that has been received since the current report has been published for demolition of a 19th century red brick dwelling in Messing. This is a clear candidate of a local heritage asset at risk, which should be added to the local list as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Dr. Stiffer. Now, I will go through each member of the committee in turn. I have got 2 members who've already put their hands up, but everyone else, don't worry, I will come to you after them as well. So we'll start with Councillor Moore.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. First of all, I want to say I'm delighted with the fact that the local list has been extended outside Colchester. It's something that I have hoped for a while would happen, and it has happened, and I'm really, really pleased. And also, on the whole, I agree with most of what's being proposed for the list. However, I would like the committee to look again at number 1. It's been dismissed, but this is a charming house on an idyllic site. It sits absolutely perfectly in its place. It's much admired. If the house had come on the open market, there would have been a long list of local people who wanted it. It's a great favourite locally. Unfortunately, it is now up for demolition, which is tragic because it is a charming example of its period. It's a time when people were starting to move to Mersey, have their second homes. It's obviously one of the vanguard because it has a prime site overlooking the water. And it is its site which makes people greedy to demolish it and put something really quite inappropriate in its place. These houses are getting very rare because now on Mersey, I mean, yes, it was of a type when it was put up, but it's now becoming very rare on Mersey because everybody's pulling them down and going modern. The street that it's in, they're all vernacular. It fits absolutely perfectly where it is. And I think it is too precious just to disregard. I am concerned that the reason for disregarding it rather sort of echoed what the owner, the new owner, says, and it's very dismissive. If I may just refer to the owner's report, while trying to dismiss it out of hand, it says, it appears to be a good example of an immediate pre-World War II dwelling, substantially complete and built in early days of the development of West Mersey as a holiday resort, consequently of local interest, potentially meeting the selection criteria. It's of potential historic interest, and certainly in that it marks a point in the development of Mersey before things went completely mad. I say they're getting very rare, and it'd be very sad to see that go. I'm quite surprised that it was dismissed out of hand when, there's 1 or 2 others on the list which, well, they might be the early use of concrete, but they don't really add a lot to the environment. And as I say, I would love it if you could support me and add this house to the list. I say there'll be a lot of weeping on the island if this is demolished. Very sad. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Jess, would you like to respond to that now before we move on to anything else?
Yeah, I certainly can try and respond to it. I mean, we certainly, I think it's wrong to say we dismissed it out of hand. We carefully considered it against the selection criteria, which are quite strict, and we have to be quite careful, not to devalue the local list. It has been altered, this particular building, and strictly looking at our criteria shouldn't be included. As I think in the report, the criteria are for substantially complete and unaltered by alterations and extensions. And this has got a big conservatory on the front. So we were sort of strictly going by those criteria. And perhaps there are better examples of its type that haven't been altered that would be eligible for the local list. But ultimately, it's a recommendation and for committee to make that decision.
Okay, thank you for that. I can see you've proposed that, Councillor Moore, so we will take that on board and discuss it more later. I've got Councillor Luxford-Vaughan with a hand up at the moment.
Thank you, Chairman. I just apologies for not having my video on. At the moment, the fact that my screen is going on and off is making me feel positively seasick, so I'm not going to put it on because I think I will throw up. But I just wanted to say that it was a joy to read this report. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I normally find it quite tedious to go through agendas, but this was a great read, and congratulations to all of those officers that have been involved in producing it. I think I may not share the love for the what is it, gun emplacement, but I know that others do, having been dragged around Brittany the last week to look at them, and totally respect the fact it's on there. The only thing I would say is that my concern about local lists would be sort of exampled by Laurel and Hardy, which were two Victorian post box, I think they were Victorian anyway, post box in Wivenhoe that were on the local list and supported by Colchester Borough Council, and yet the post office still went and removed one of them without the consent of anybody. So I'd like, the question I would have is what supports the fact that we've designated these particular assets as of merit to stop them actually getting destroyed.
Okay, Jess, if you'd like to respond to that point from Councillor Luxford-Vaughan.
Sure. In terms of what prevents them being demolished or removed, in terms of the NPPF, there's quite clear guidance on how undesignated, non-designated heritage assets should be dealt with and considered through the planning system. Obviously, in the case of those post boxes, perhaps they fell out of the planning system, and it is extremely disappointing. And we need to, have better communication with owners of the assets to try and negotiate effectively memorandum of understanding, so we can ensure that they are protected for the future, I think.
Okay, thank you for that. Just a couple of comments I wanted to make, which I made earlier. I think just to back up one thing Councillor Moore said, I'm very glad to see with the recommendations for addition to the list here are from a widespread throughout the borough, and that work we've done in consulting and pushing out has actually brought forward a lot of nominations for new things there. And I'm glad, hopeful that going forward we'll keep to generate new additions to it as they get identified. And I think, as you pointed out, the neighbourhood planning process in Marks Tay has been very useful in identifying new things that we can add to the local list. And just, I think, also worth noting for the committee that there are two decisions to make here. First is that list of things to add to the local list. Second is the procedure about being able to add things into the emergency editions, I think, as we sort of called them, to give officers that power to temporarily put them on and then bring that to the next committee. That we are approving that as part of this report as well. So I'll move around, I'll go around the rest of the committee just to see if there are any questions or comments. Once we're done with that, we'll come back to Councillor Moore's point about item 1, the building in West Mersey, and the question of the listing or not of that. So I'll begin. Councillor Hayter.
Thank you, Chair. No, I just want to mention how good the report was, the detail on it, and certainly interesting reading. I found a few things out there that I was completely unaware of with the locations around the borough. So no, really interesting, and but nothing I need to bring to it at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm delighted with the report. As I would say, whether I'll say I've championed the local list, the local list is something which has been very dear to my heart since we started doing it. I'm really pleased with it. I'm really pleased that councillors and residents have obviously been incredibly busy, and that you've got such an extensive list now, Jess, which has been that we're adding, and the fact that we've taken it outside of Colchester town. From a parochial point of view, I think I ought to congratulate Patricia Beach, who's obviously made a submission this evening, and you've said Jess has been instrumental in identifying those heritage assets or assets that she feels should be included within the list during the neighbourhood plan process, which is another big thumbs up for the neighbourhood plan process and how important those can be for communities. Just to understand, also everyone does understand, does the local list prevent demolition of a building if it's locally listed? Obviously, if it was listed, that would be a different matter. I know the local list carries planning weight, and I know it means that we're going to have to negotiate, or that there will be a large degree of negotiation with developers over properties, and that we can and have saved some properties. I just want to check whether the local list will actually prevent demolition if someone is determined to demolish. Regarding Councillor Moore's plea for number 1, what I'd say is Councillor Moore is incredibly knowledgeable on Mersey. She's actually, she was at one point my next door neighbour, and I was always amazed at her knowledge on local history. She's a researcher, you know, she disappears and used to disappear off a lot to the records office, poring over things for weeks, researching local history. So I wouldn't take anything that she, if she's making a plea and saying that something is important locally, I wouldn't dismiss that personally. I certainly wouldn't dismiss it out of hand. Jess, you've said that the front of that building has a large conservatory on it. Are there other substantial changes to it? Bearing in mind a conservatory I see as a sort of a temporary structure, really. It's something you can get away with, maybe not on the front of a building without a planning permission, but it's something fairly easy to add to a building, but it's also fairly easy to remove from a building, and the building remains, the fabric of the building remains fairly unaltered from its original state if you were to do that. So I just wonder if that's something that could be looked at again, whether we can make that decision this evening or whether it's something that could be looked at again. And something else which I welcome, because I think I may have proposed it last time, is that there should be emergency powers for Karen to be able, the head of planning, to be able to locally list something urgently if we needed to do so. I just wonder if it's worth re-looking at that, given what Councillor Moore has said and her local knowledge. And I promise you she does know Mersey like the back of her hand. Can we have another look at that one, please? I'd be happy to support her in retaining it. I just wonder if you would want to do that this evening, or whether it's something we could do as an emergency, having you re-looked at it. But I'd like some more thought put into it, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Yeah, I think that there's a good point there about whether or not we can sort of not outright reject that one tonight, but actually maybe take it away for it to look at it again, especially if Councillor Moore has some extra information that will be quite pertinent in that. But Jess, if you want to respond to the other questions.
Yeah,
right.
Perfectly happy to take that away and have another look. Not tonight. I didn't think it would be inadvisable. Take it back and look at it with colleagues again, we can, assuming you adopt the recommendation for emergency listing, we could then put it on at a later date if required, if we think it meets it. And going back to your first point about demolition, no, it doesn't actually prevent demolition of heritage assets being on the local list, unfortunately. Obviously, if there are other issues such as being in a conservation area, then that would be drawn in that way, but not by itself. We could investigate issuing Article 4 directions, which would then prevent demolition of locally listed heritage assets, and that's something which I can explore with planning colleagues as well. That would be helpful.
Thank you on that. Councillor Scordis.
Yeah, no, it's a really good report. We obviously looked at this just over a year ago now, I think it is. And obviously we reached quite far, which is really good. So we have spread the message very well. So very happy. I think you summed it up quite well, Chair, about the positive points on here. What would be good is if we could do some comms on this after. So whether Jess could talk to our comms team about just putting some positive messages out about this, because we usually hear how Colchester doesn't make the most of its history. So it'd be good to put a message out about how we are protecting local historic assets that people aren't actually aware of.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure we can nudge that one up the chain to get some publicity. Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. It was about a year ago, I think it was last October, when we looked at the Row Hedge pump station, and we had quite a long discussion on the panel then about a number of other assets that we thought would be worthwhile popping on the local list. And I'm really glad to see that so many have come forward now. It's amazing. So if we want to safeguard these local assets, sometimes we talk about local and we mean Colchester, but this is really local to your neighbourhood. The bus shelter that you might have stood in the rain when you were a child, you know, the post box that you've posted letters in years ago. These are really familiar objects and places to go. They're places of that identify the resident in a certain place. And I think it's really important that we safeguard them for future generations. And we know now that memories are really important. So each one of these will have a specific memory attached to it for at least one resident. So I think it's great that so many have come forward. Really good report, and I really like the comments as well that are put at the side. You can learn so much from reading a report like this. It's not dull and dry. Not saying that all council reports are dull and dry, but you know, some are. So good, and great to have quality photos as well to get a really good idea rather than just the text. So thank you, happy to support.
Thank you, Councillor Bourne. And Councillor Willits.
Chairman, it's a first-class report, and I will be supporting both the recommendations. I think it's absolutely essential that we look at what one might describe as the second tier of valued buildings which are not capable of being listed per se, but which are so important to the local communities. So excellent report. I'll be supporting it. I do have one almost tangential comment to the issue, which has already been raised, I think, by a couple of members. The title of the item is Colchester Local List, and I think this causes a degree of confusion. The village in which I live at the moment was not part of Colchester until 1974 local government reorganisation for, I was going to say millennia, but that would be over-exaggeration. For a long time, it was part of Lexington and Winstry Council, not part of Colchester. And as ever, we move slowly in local government. So some 40 years after the rural areas were incorporated into Colchester Borough, we think about adding their cherished but not graded buildings to the Colchester list. And I would be much happier if it was described as the Colchester Borough local list, so that it was quite clear that Colchester Borough, which includes all the villages which are not part of Colchester town, are in fact just as eligible to have their cherished landmarks and buildings noted as those in the town centre. And I think this is a point on which we fall foul many occasions, Chairman. For instance, the borough starts certainly on the west side at a point southwest of Marks Tay on the A12, but that we put the Welcome to Colchester notice on the Spring Lane roundabout on the boundary of the old town centre. And I think it's the mindset that we have that it's only important if it's in Colchester town or what was Colchester town. But this report clearly dispels the myth and shows that buildings or edifices of value, no matter where they are in the borough, are equally acceptable and supported by us for preservation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Willits, and I think that is an important point that we do need to note. It is a borough-wide list, not just a town one, and I think it's one thing that's sort of been taken into account with a lot of these additions as they go there. But I know the officers will take that away, and I think especially if we might do publicity based on this, I think that's a point that needs to be stressed. So just to go back to Councillor Moore's point, I think Councillor Ellis and I came up with the suggestion that we sort of basically park that one, and if you, Councillor Moore and the officers, then want to take it away and look at it some more, and then there is the new procedure that it can be brought on doing that. Would you be happy with that, Councillor Moore?
Thank you. I am very concerned in that there is already an application to demolish. I think if we defer, it will simply be too late. I mean, I would love it not to be turned down out of hand, but I am really worried that any putting it on the back burner for, I mean, when the next meeting is, unless it could have a degree of protection until then, it will be gone. It will definitely be gone. Sorry, while I'm here, the alterations, I should have mentioned that. There is not much in the way of alterations. What you see from the road is all original. There is the conservatory round the back, and some of the windows that face the sea, where south, which get a huge amount of battering, have been replaced with something, I don't know what, but they are not the original windows, which is not surprising. But as I say, I repeat, unless it is protected quite quickly, it will be gone. Thank you.
I think the point is it can be added very quickly now by officers if we can agree that the procedure we agree tonight does allow officers to put it on, and then that would be confirmed at the next meeting. So we wouldn't be waiting until October to put it on. It could be put on this week, basically. If you can arrange that meeting with the officers quickly to go through it. I'm not sure. I don't really sort of want to make too many commitments on their time straight away, but I think it's just in that case of having that, if there is extra evidence or arguments they haven't been aware of, I think that those need to be considered. I'm just wary about rushing it through tonight, but I think, I'm not sure. Karen, sorry, I can see your hand. And then Councillor Ellis. Sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate what everyone said. I wonder if the way forward is to see if we can get an independent view on it. So if members may recall, the original local list was devised by Philip Crummy and a number of local experts in the field. How about we see if we can get one of those that's still about to have a quick look, hopefully this week, maybe, and then that could inform the decision, because it takes that subjectivity away, because the officers have already looked at it in the team with knowledge in the area and they've come to that conclusion. We have to be very careful not to water down the list so that other buildings aren't given as much protection. So it is a careful balance, but that seems to me, if we could ask Philip or Patrick Denny or Andrew Phillips, maybe one of those, to perhaps have a look at it and see if they think it's of the same sort of standard as the rest of the list. Does that sound like a way forward?
I think so. So Councillor Ellis had his hand up, but then it went down. I'm not sure if he's
and then sorry, I put it down because you recognised that I'd had it up, Chairman. That was all. I'd agree with Karen. I think that sounds a sensible solution. I'd appreciate if Councillor Moore could actually have a discussion with the person that's going to see it, so she can put her point of view, because I think her knowledge of Mersey, as I said, is extensive. And if she says there are not many houses of this type and can explain her case, then that would make sense to me. I absolutely agree. We do not want to dilute the list. That was where I was coming from in the first place by saying let's not necessarily add it this evening, although I'm quite supportive. because I don't want to dilute the list, but I do think it warrants a second look, given the argument that she's made. It may be that independent experts say, no, it doesn't. And if that's the case, then I'll have to live with that, as will Councillor Moore. But I just think it deserves a second chance. So, and as you have pointed out, Chairman, and I think Jess, this can be done very quickly, if necessary, under the powers that we're voting for, hopefully in a few minutes, to give Karen, so that she could actually put this on very rapidly if necessary. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Moore.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was a bit concerned about it being left in the hands of a couple of archaeologists, because there is no doubt the house is not of great historic value, and therefore, it's one of those properties that almost fits all the criteria, and it's important for where it is and its place in the development of Mersey, whether that's good or bad, but it is important for that. I wouldn't want it just to be thrown out on architectural terms when there is so much more to that particular site and house. So it's the house on its site which is the important bit, which is why another house of the same age somewhere else wouldn't be so important. I will shut up now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I think subject to that one being reviewed by an independent person as soon as possible, ideally within this week. I think, Karen, as you suggested that, I presume that means you think that's possible. I would propose we move forward onto the votes on this item, which is, let me just find the action required, which is 2.1 on the agenda, which is to agree the changes to the local list and to approve the proposed amendments to the list and the delegation of authority to the lead officer to add heritage assets to the list for an interim period prior to ratification by the committee in future. So, Jan, are you carrying out the votes?
I will, yes.
Yep.
I'll start a call. So I've gone alphabetically. So I'll start with you, Councillor Barlow.
4.
Councillor Bourne.
4.
Councillor Ellis.
4.
Councillor Hayter.
4.
Councillor Luxford Vaughan.
4.
Councillor Moore.
4.
Councillor Roxford isn't here, so Councillor Scordis.
4.
And Councillor Willits.
4.
That's 8-4, Chair.
Thank you. That's approved. And
Chairman, sorry, just as a point of order, or just to check, isn't it? I'm fine that Jan's done it this way round, but doesn't the chairman have the final vote on these things, or are we going to do it in alphabetical order each time? Richard might be able to.
No, if the votes were tied, the chairman would have a second casting vote, but not necessarily a final vote on the first round of voting.
Councillor Moore, your hand's still up. I'm not sure if you.
Councillor Barlow, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry, Jen. That item's approved and he's still here. I'd just like to again thank Dr. Jess Tipper for all his work on that. As I understand, this is probably going to be the last council meeting he's going to be at because he's moving on to bigger and better things. So I think just on behalf of the committee and the council, let's thank him for all his work on this before he moves on.
Thanks very much. That's very kind.
Okay, so we now move on to item 8, which is adoption of the Essex Coast Recreational Disturbance Avoidance and Mitigation Strategy, which we'll now be calling RAMS from now on, the Supplementary Planning Document, the SPD. So I have Councillor Gocher as a visiting councillor wishing to speak on this item. So Mark, over to you.
Good evening, Chair. I've been contacted by a local naturalist whose expertise on these matters is far greater than mine. So I just said I'd read out some of the salient points from the document that he sent to me. The comments are that first of all, to just be wary as a panel or committee of putting too much weight on the fact that the document is approved by Natural England. Natural England have increasingly become a laughingstock among serious naturalists and are widely viewed as nothing more than a government puppet who, basically wave through what the government wishes to do. So there's just a note of caution there. Other concerns raised are Colchester, ironically, is the fastest growing town, but also one of the driest. And in the document, there needs to be more about the great pressure that already exists to turn over clear water. And many streams are already at low flow rate, making entire water-dependent ecosystems under the threat of extinction. The third point raised is that there's not enough in the document on birds. The greatest threat to birds apparently is disturbance to habitat where shorebirds feed outside of the breeding season. So we're not talking about when they're nesting, but outside of that, particularly in the autumn, where long distance migrant birds arrive to the shores of this country, low on body fat, and disturbance to those arriving birds, which causes them to fly up, is a major cause of bird mortality. And there needs to be more of that in the report. The fourth point raised by the naturalist is that sea walls are an extremely valuable habitat and should not be trimmed on a regular basis, because by trimming them, you destroy the ecosystem within the flora on the wall. And the final point raised is one that I know people have raised before, and that is that Colchester Borough Council really needs an in-house ecologist, someone with the expertise to look over these documents from an ecological point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goetcher. I'll now ask Karen to present the report, and if she has any responses to those points you've raised, if she can raise them in there as well.
Thank you. Like Councillor Goetcher, I'm no expert in this subject either, so I will present the report. Fortunately, you've heard two presentations previously from Shelley, who does know an awful lot more about this than I do. If need be, I will have to defer to her return from leave to respond, but I can actually answer, address the points Councillor Goetcher raised, because the time for amendments has been and gone, I'm afraid. The person that you were reading on behalf of may have commented on the document. It was out for consultation at the beginning of the year, and attached to the report is a detailed appendix of that consultation and what was received, and there was a lot of amendments made as a result, so hopefully they are included. We've also set up the Essex Bird Aware brand. So I think we're taking birds very seriously in this, so that you might like to reassure the person about that. But if there is anything more detailed, then do please tell them to contact Shelley and my team. So by way of introduction then to the report, you have seen this document twice previously. It concerns Essex Coast Recreational Disturbance, Avoidance and Mitigation Strategy, otherwise known as RAMS. Shelley has explained the purpose of RAMS before, which is to avoid and mitigate the likely significant effects to the sensitive habitats of the Essex coast from increased housing development. The RAMS strategy document also includes a technical report and mitigation report, which you adopted at your meeting in October last year. At that meeting, you agreed consultation on the supplementary planning document, which is what I referred to taking place in January and February. Once adopted, the supplementary planning document carries more weight and will be a material consideration in the determination of planning applications. As such, it will help protect the birds and habitats of the Essex coast from increased visitor numbers. The current tariff, which is included in the SPD, is just over £125 per dwelling. Interestingly, in the consultation, some people felt that was too low and some people felt it was too high. So maybe that suggests it's about right, but compared to other contributions, it seems quite low. All residential development in the borough is required to pay the contribution because the whole borough falls within the zone of influence. Additional mitigation in the form of green infrastructure is also required on larger sites. As I mentioned, the consultation took place earlier in the year and all representations have been considered and modifications made. And that's in the appendix. The SPD itself is in another appendix as well. So the project is now moving into the delivery phase. We've been collecting those £125 and the sums are starting to add up. So Chelmsford City Council will be the accountable body and deal with the money. They'll be responsible for holding and administering the VAN's contributions. They'll provide advice and guidance on financial matters and employ and manage the delivery officer. Another local authority to be determined will employ the rangers, and there's 2 rangers proposed initially, but it's expected in the future that 2 water rangers will also be employed. So I'm happy to attempt to answer any questions, as I say, but I'm not an expert on the detail in this field. But we're hoping today to adopt the SPD so that it can become a material planning consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I can see Councillor Luxford-Vaughan has her hand up and then Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to support the comments made by Mark Grocher there about Natural England, and also, you know, the fact that we are the fastest growing town, and yet we also are the driest. And you know, the one thing I would add to the points he's already made is that we now know that Anglian Water are severely reducing their discharge policies, so that, you know, we're basically pumping sewage into the river as well, which is obviously not helping the situation. That's not an issue for this report, but it, you know, it needs to be borne in mind along with his points about the erosion of the seawall. Equally, I'm upset that, you know, we're just talking about breeding seasons. It just shows a complete lack of understanding of you know, what actually is the big problem with bird mortality on the river. I suppose, you know, my major concern is the monitoring and what Karen, thank you, has just told us about who'll be administrating this thing. You know, basically we've said in section 6 that the monitoring will be done internally, basically. I think Essex is the highest it ever goes, which, and this I'm referring to the mitigating measures and whether they're actually going to work. You know, we're asking ourselves to mark our own homework, which clearly we're going to say it's all fine. And yet, you know, I think there are some classic examples, unfortunately, that we are unqualified to be able to do that work. I would cite the example of Salary Brook, where we relied on reports delivered by contractors that there were no dormouse present on the site before they went in and demolished it, and there clearly is evidence out there that they were present. And then when it was desolated and looked like the landscape of the moon, it was actually a perfect environment for a different type of bird. I won't try and embarrass myself by mentioning which bird it was because I'll get it wrong. And yet they went in and did the remedial work without actually doing a survey of whether that bird, which is incredibly rare, was actually using it for breeding. And yet again, we accepted that report without questioning it because, you know, no fault of the officers that we have, but we don't have, you know, a full-time ecologist that actually understands these issues, and they are complicated, and you know, you have to have a lifelong passion to really be able to make valuable contributions. And I use another example of you know, maintaining our own open spaces, that you know, we're going along and mowing things when actually it's doing all sorts of environmental damage. Equally, our policy for the woodland project, planting trees, we're planting the wrong trees in the wrong place, and it's actually potentially going to create a biodiversity loss, which, you know, I don't think it's acceptable that we're marking our own homework. The idea, again, that we'll have at some point two waterborne ranges on a coastline. It's the longest in the whole of the country. It's just mental. I mean, you know, all of the prosecutions that I'm aware of that have happened in the last few years have come about because of footage and reports from members of the public. The only reason why we're not, you know, having severe problems is because the public are alert, and having two ranges is just totally inadequate. I don't want to, you know, stand against this, because obviously, you know, any money that we can get to try and mitigate the problems, you know, is good. But I think the report and, well, the policy as it stands is just papering over the cracks, and we're simply not effectively addressing what issues are going to happen. And I don't think, unless we're prepared to put some sort of independent review of whether or not the mitigation measures are working, that it'll have any effect whatsoever. It's just lip service to the environment. So unfortunately, I can't support adopting the paper.
Thank you. I've got two other councillors with their hands up. I'll take them and then go back to Karen for any responses. Councillor Moore first, and then Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. I totally agree with what Councillor Luxford-Bourne and Councillor Gocher have said. See, I'm wearing my green hat tonight. I live right on the coast. On a daily basis, I see the pressure of tourism on a very fragile coastline. The idea that something should be done to protect the birds and any other wildlife is brilliant. But to collect £125, which is peanuts in today's terms, and spend it on educational leaflets and a couple of rangers now and maybe something on the water later, I'm afraid, again, I agree with Councillor Luxford-Bourne, it is nothing. It will do nothing. It's, if you like, it's paying lip service, the fact we ought to be caring, and we certainly should be caring, but it's not actually going to achieve anything that I can see. I felt this right from the beginning. What we need is actually to stop the hundreds and thousands of people that pour into our, for Colchester, we have a very short accessible coastline, very, very short. Basically, it's Mersey. And what we need is to be able to slow down the sheer volume of people that just desperately pile in wanting to be at the seaside. They're not going to be impressed by a few leaflets. They're not going to be impressed by a ranger who might be up somewhere else entirely. It's a nice idea, but I can't see how it's going to work. And I wish that we could put forward something so much better, even if it means well, for Mersey, I would say we charge non-residents to come on the island. There must be ways of slowing this gathering rush to the edge of the water. Where we've got incidents of when there was lockdown, seals and that were coming ashore, and there's been a baby seal which had been abandoned and rescued just in the last few days, because people have arrived and totally any good that the Peace and Quiet has done. Please, please, can we think of something? I won't say I'm against this, because something needs to be done, but it's totally inadequate and always has been right from the inception. So I leave you with that to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Councillor Ellis.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Moore. I'm thinking about it too. I'm thinking about having to pay to go onto Mersey, which I go on every day, so I can do without that. Thank you very much. But I do get where you're coming from. I see the damage that the jet skis are doing as you go across the Strood. If you see how many people are using jet skis and what have you throughout the year, I don't want to stop people enjoying the countryside and enjoying the water, but I think Councillor Goetcher was speaking about, as was Councillor Luxford-Vaughan, the damage that can be done to our visiting. And we are one of the main areas for migration for some of these visiting wildfowl. During months that are not the breeding season, it's actually vital that something is done to protect them. Now, I'm not going to say that this is perfect or a perfect SPD, but we've looked at this twice before. I think Karen was saying, I remember going through this in great detail, agreeing to go out on consultation on it. We have gone out, it's come back. There's an extensive list of changes that have been made because of that consultation, which I'm very pleased to see. So from a point of view of whether I'll support it or not, I will support it. I think it's not perfect. I agree that I'm a bit alarmed actually at something that Councillor Luxford-Vaughan has said this evening about us planting the wrong sort of trees in our quest to plant trees that we have been doing for the last year or two, certainly longer than that, because I know it was something Councillor Robert Davison brought in originally. But this new concerted effort to plant trees, I'm surprised that if we have been planting the wrong trees in the wrong places, because the last thing we want to do is to cause any sort of issue with biodiversity. Perhaps that's something that can be taken on board by officers and looked at. I would certainly like to know the answer to that. I agree we could do with our own ecologist. Whether that's something that can be afforded or not, I don't know. Can we use someone, just as Karen suggested this evening, using an independent expert to look at a property on Mersey? Is it something that we could do rather more often, employing an independent ecologist for independent advice, rather than relying on officers who may not be fully qualified in this? They may be. I'm picking up what has been said in this committee meeting, and I don't know the answer, but I certainly do think that we do need someone with some serious ecological expertise as we move forward with this process. The rangers, 2 rangers now, 2 rangers to follow. I'd like us to be bidding to provide those rangers personally, because as Councillor Moore was saying, we have a lot of the coastline, I think, here. So I'd like to see that happen. And whilst other councillors may be disappointed in this, I think it's a really good start. It can be amended, I'm sure. We can review an SPD, can't we, Karen, in the future. But we need to start this process somehow. I'd be interested to know, £125 doesn't sound a lot, but if it's per new dwelling, I think that's going to add up to quite a lot of money. I don't know if you know how much has been raised already, Karen. If you may know what the projected figure is. If you don't, perhaps we could be told by Shelley separately later on via email or what have you. but I think it's going to add up to a fairly substantial amount of money. I do want to make sure that that money is invested in protecting the coastline there, and not just on paying a number of officers to administer, or Chelmsford to administer the whole project. It's important, obviously, there's going to be some administration costs and they'll need to be recovered, but we do need to actually be spending the money where it is needed on protecting the coastline and the environment. Thank you. But I'll be supporting this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Just before we go to Karen, I just wanted to add a couple of points. I think what Councillor Ellis said does catch some of my perspective on this. And I think I do take on board the points that are raised about, I think there is a question about this probably doesn't go far enough, doesn't achieve all we want. However, it's better than the starting point. And I think, yeah, we have to sort of take on that sort of incremental basis, is that this is better than what we have. And so moving forward somewhere, I think there are issues, there are things we're going to want to take forward. And I do take on board, I think, with the comment about need for ecologists. We have the need for quite a lot of the specialist staff within the Borough Council and that specialist advice. The question is, over the years, we've lost a lot of that with cutbacks and that. And so you end up having to bring in the independent advice as consultants, basically, which we all decry that spending money on. So a bit of a catch-22 in there. But no, I think there's a lot of ecologists in other places, where other roles that we would like. The question is, I think, is A, could you afford it? And B, what would you have to get rid of in order to have that capacity instead, I think, is the present. We don't really have that expansionary ability. But I'll ask Karen to respond to any of the points and questions made and then come round the other members of the committee.
Thank you. Yeah, just a few comments there. The monitoring does involve a member and officer forum in terms of the Essex Coastal Forum. So there is monitoring going on there outside of just an officer forum. I've got every confidence in Chelmsford undertaking the initial role managing this work. They've been very instrumental. It's really been led by us and Chelmsford and pushed all the way through by us and them, I've got to say. And to be quite honest, I think maybe some of the others with a bigger coastline might like to step up and do their part as well. But we'll see what happens there. And in terms of ecologists, yes, I agree. It would be great to have an ecologist in-house. I don't think we could justify a full-time ecologist. We did look at it a few years ago. Don't think we could afford it, and don't think there's a full-time role. Whether there's something more a shared resource, I don't know. But what we've done in the past is sought the advice from specialists, and sometimes they will vary. So, for example, we needed an ecologist to help us with an appeal regarding a houseboat in Mersey, and the first person we went to didn't specialise in that type of ecology. So again, if we were to have someone in-house, we'd need to, they'd need to be a good all-rounder, whereas at the moment we can pick and choose perhaps when we need people. Who's the best person for a particular piece of work. So I think that's all I would say in response to the comments so far.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Councillor Luxford-Vaughan, your hand's up.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say on that point about an in-house ecologist, there are plenty of people, I don't know why they all gather in Wivenhoe, but there are plenty of people that are happy to offer advice free of charge. The point is that we need to acknowledge that they have something to say and listen to what they're saying. Certainly, as Councillor Groces and others have confessed, I don't know the first thing, but about anything really. But I am being told by more than one member of the public, certainly in Wivenhoe, we're making mistakes. We just need to listen to that advice. We don't necessarily have to pay someone at this stage, but I think a willingness for officers to engage those people would be nice to hear tonight.
Thank you. I'll just go through the other councillors who haven't spoken just to check if they have any comments or questions on this. So Councillor Scordis.
Yep, thanks, Chair. This has gone to consultation says that people have actually had their time to have a say, and having it now at this meeting, when we discussed this a year ago as well, doesn't seem appropriate. There was a time to consult on this, and it now seems that, oh, everything's been done wrong, and that actually seems inappropriate, the work the officers have put in, and we haven't got Shelley here to back up a lot of that evidence, but I imagine councillors who are upset can contact Shelley when she's back from leave. Other than that, I'm happy with the report. I've sat on the Coastal Forum Committee before, so aware of the work that they do. They work with all other councils around Essex. And regarding an ecologist, again, I think costings is, we've suffered so many cuts over the last 10 years that costings, it's really not feasible. And there may be people who can offer that advice, and we could look at that. But we do also have to look at people's agendas when we're asking for that advice. And Essex County Council do have people who help in that regard as well when we're doing this work. So it's not all just down to Colchester. There is a partnership going on among different councils. But I'll be supporting this, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scordis. Councillor Willits.
Yes, Chairman, I believe that the work to mitigate the effect of recreation is a truly worthy pursuit, and that we as a council should certainly be protecting our coastal areas from this disturbance. And I can certainly see the merit in cooperating with the other coastal districts and boroughs in what we're doing, because that makes sense to understand the problem in a greater context. Perchance, I was substituting on this committee first time we looked at this particular issue, and while I consider the proposals are eminently sensible, what I considered to be rather unsensible was the way the financing of this was working. I mean, the methodology at that time, and it seems to have hardly changed in the intervening 2 years, was how much do we need? 2 rangers plus support services and other on costs. Folks are not likely to pay more than £100 to £120 towards this particular activity, and with those variables, the area of influence has to extend almost out to Stansted Airport to collect in the amount of money that we require, although no one out in that area, or hardly anyone out in that area, Chairman, comes to our part of the beach on a regular basis. So I couldn't understand the finance of it. My view all along is that if it's an important municipal service affecting Colchester, then we should be paying for it directly and controlling precisely what goes on. And if our argument is that coastal disturbance is a municipal service of importance, then it should be in our general budget, rather than going around with a begging bowl asking for £125 from anyone who carries out a development. And on the same argument, Chairman, of course, if we had 10 rangers, we'd probably have to extend the area of influence right up to Milton Keynes to get in the amount of money we receive. So I have grave suspicions about whether this is the right way to do it, although we've already heard the argument in these financially stricken times. It's an easy way of doing it, but I don't think it's the best way of doing it. I also subscribe to the view that a lot of damage to our coastal area is not being done by careful visitors from the borough who perhaps go for a day's afternoon's walk along the coastal strip. I live just off the A12, and on a bank holiday, the The traffic jams for the coast come all the way back to the 8 Ash Green roundabout. And the people who are going in massive numbers to the coast, and in my view doing considerable damage, are from the London boroughs. And if we should be asking anyone to make a contribution towards mitigating the effect of coastal disturbance, it should be these hordes of people who pour into Essex, through our county and up to our beautiful coast every time there is a holiday. So yeah, I think it's a great shame we're not going with our begging bowl to the London boroughs and saying, look here, chaps, it's your people who come out to eat their candy floss and ruin our coastal area. You should be making a contribution. So we should either fund it ourselves, or we should ask the whole of the southeast to chip in and fund the disturbance mitigation. Anything in the middle just doesn't make sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Willett. Councillor Hayter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, there's some interesting thoughts being raised from a few of the guys here. It's good to hear. There's nothing more for me to add, but I am broadly supportive of this here. Thank you.
Councillor Bourne's video is off, so I'm not sure if she's actually still present or not. Okay, well, Karen, we'll go back to you. You have your hand raised, I see, and if there's any response.
Yeah, it was just I hadn't picked up on Andrew's point about the money. And I know we had thousands in the pot already, but I don't know how many thousands. But like him, I was trying to work out the sums of based on sort of 1,000 dwellings a year and what that might contribute. So it does all start to add up. He's right, but I haven't got a figure on exactly what we've collected so far. But I can certainly find out from the team this week.
Thank you. Councillor Bourne, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you, Chair. I do know that we did spend a lot of time talking about RAMS at a previous meeting. For some of us, it was entirely new content. It was a long meeting, and I do agree with Councillor Ellis that we had a full and frank discussion about some of the merits and the demerits of the proposals that we had in front of us on that night. And we did go out to extensive consultation, and all of those points have been incorporated in this current proposal. So I'm fully supportive of the paper and will be voting for it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bourne. I don't see any other hands being raised at the moment, so just let me find the right one, I think. So yeah, we have 2 actions requested. 2.1 is to adopt the RAMS SPD, and second is to delegate authority to the lead officer to make any minor changes should they be necessary, and they will be any changes considered by the lead officer and group spokespersons to be more than minor will be reported back to us as a committee. So Jan, if you want to take the vote.
Yes, I'll go the same order again, Chair. So Councillor Barlow.
4.
Councillor Vaughan.
4.
Councillor Ellis.
4.
Councillor Hayter.
4.
Councillor Luxford Vaughan.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Moore.
Abstain.
Councillor Scordis.
4.
Councillor Willits.
Abstain.
That's 5, 4 and 3 abstained, Chair.
Thank you for that. That's approved. We can now move on to item 9, which is the consultation on proposals for reform of the planning system and changes to national planning policy. I've got 3 councillors here who wish to have their say. Councillor Fox, Councillor Goetcher and Councillor Julie Young. I'll ask them to speak in that order. So we'll start with Councillor Fox, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's always a pleasure to come to the Local Plan Committee And I think the paper in front of you this evening is of vital importance to the future of Colchester. And frankly, why would anybody welcome reforms that trample over local control, lead to poor house building and fewer affordable homes? The white paper would result in reduced democratic control, more permitted development, a risk to social housing, a system funded by and therefore controlled by developers, and poor quality, leading to poor quality housing. As the portfolio holder for housing, you won't be surprised to hear that I'm not against house building. I believe it's the responsibility of elected representatives to plan for the future. We need the right number of homes in the right places with the right infrastructure and facilities. That's parks, playgrounds, paths to walking and cycling, roads for public transport, health centres and schools, to name a few. The white paper, unfortunately, moves us from an assumption in favour of sustainable development to a system that prioritises substantial development. Modelling of the proposed changes to house numbers suggests Colchester would need to build a minimum of 1,600 houses a year. And because of the nature of build-out rates, that means that in reality, in some years, we would probably deliver far more. And where are those further houses going to go above and beyond those sites that this council has already allocated in the emerging local plan? More houses on Mersey? Or would the MOD push for even more houses on Middlewick? And frankly, permitted development means tiny rooms without light, cramming people and families into tower blocks, unsuitable converted premises without any garden or outside space. And I was really disappointed to see at least one local Conservative councillor welcome the new white paper, calling it positive. He doesn't appear to be in attendance at tonight's local plan committee. Our 3 local MPs must stand up for the whole of the borough of Colchester. 2 of those are members of Parliament, and 2 of those members of Parliament are members of the government. This is a white paper which sets out the government's policy for future legislation. If we don't fight this now, it will be too late. And the 3rd MP has already begun campaigning against the existing rules for planning and calling for all planning applications on Mersey to be put on hold. What we need for Colchester is good quality homes in the right places, local democratic control and decision-making, homes built with the right infrastructure, public transport, health centres, schools, parks and playgrounds, and more council homes that are truly affordable. I ask the local plan committee tonight to make their views known on this matter in the strongest possible terms. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. Councillor Gocher.
Thank you, Chair. I am extremely concerned about these proposals. They are, as has already been said by one of the previous speakers, a developer's charter. Basically, any countryside that isn't in the green belt can be designated for renewal or growth, and houses and other structures can then be built on them without the need for planning permission, which removes local democratic accountability from the process. It is an attack on local democracy. It is basically placing control of development in the hands of developing companies or development companies and taking power away from local elected representatives. Across the whole country already, there are protests here, protests there, people with placards, save our meadow, save our village. Imagine that magnified 100-fold and in all of our wards. That is the likely consequence of these proposals. It does indeed replace an already existing presumption in favour of development with a presumption in favour of mass development. And I would say to people, this is not necessarily party political. I'd echo what Councillor Lilly said at the beginning of the meeting. I'm getting a sense from people that people are disgruntled and annoyed about Trump. It's not just you conceptualise that as. I know a lot of Conservative voters up in Leicestershire, where my family live, who are terrified by this. What do these proposals conserve? They don't conserve the countryside. They threaten the entire fabric of the country. And therefore, what I would ask the local plan committee to do is as Councillor Liddy said, to ask the 3 MPs who represent parts of this borough to lobby the government to change direction on this. Because let's face it, their lobbying power is worth far more than someone like me sounding off on this. And I would personally appeal to the Conservative councillors on the Borough Council to do all they can to lobby our MPs, to lobby the government on this. There's no point in waiting until this has all gone through, and then we're having to deal with the consequence in our own wards and try and explain to our own voters why we don't have the power to stop the unwanted developments that they don't want. And I would also echo some of the comments by Councillor Fox about the fact that these proposals will make it harder to deliver the kind of housing that is needed, the social housing, where there is a profound social need for homes. And so it's a social issue on that level as well. So I would simply appeal to the local plan committee to make its views known as strongly as possible and to ask our MPs to lobby the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goach. Councillor Julie Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think no one here could argue that the development of the local plan and planning generally within Colchester is easy. In fact, I'm sure we all burn the midnight oil through ploughing through documents, consulting with local residents, speaking at committee on behalf of communities. Sometimes things fall our preferred way and on other occasions they simply don't. What we have is an established process that is democratic and has the benefit of professional planners working with developers to shape proposals in accordance with our planning policies and local members debating plans and considering applications through democratic decision-making structures. This takes time, but good outcomes are not achieved by rushing things through in undue haste. All of this is set to change. I've picked out quite a few words and phrases that ought to trouble us all. Growth areas, substantial development, and in capital letters, approval automatically granted. The existing test of soundness would be abolished. Duty to cooperate abolished. Just at a time we are expected to join up with other councils. It's counterintuitive. There is talk of a standard templates map. We would move from a document process to one based on data. Interactive maps that show what can be built where. Frankly, members, it's a development stream. There's mention of a new body to support the delivery of design codes, but how will local character be handled by this new quango? It is clear where SIL has been adopted, the provision of affordable housing has fallen, and this is one of the most unwelcome proposals. In addition to dropping 106 payments, we will see large sites split into small sites to accelerate development. By splitting large sites into small sites, the threshold for contributions to affordable housing will be lifted. Option 1 on first homes should be rejected. This will do nothing to support those on our housing waiting list. Crucially, the proposals say not enough homes are being built. That may be true in some areas, but in Colchester, we have maintained our 5-year supply and the 920 units are hardly popular. And if these proposals to change the standard method for housing need are accepted, we could move to 612 per year. This is a ludicrous 75% increase. We have Bernard Jenkins backing John Acker's call for Mersey not to have any planning applications processed, while he remains a member of a government attempt to impose a huge increase in housing numbers upon us. The calculations seem to have been made by a civil servant dividing 300,000 houses by the amount of planning authorities that we have. Talk of a fair share approach is fanciful. We have enough experience to know that no site is without controversy, large or small, whether it's garden community, town centre student flats, or 100 homes on an island or small village development. Local people want to have their say and will fiercely resist automatic approvals. So talk of streamlining consultation will go down badly. I know Councillor Willett spoke of the need for better consultation by NEGC, so I know he won't be happy with less consultation. Sustainability appraisals are to be abolished, and there is talk of a simplified process for assessing the environmental impact. Bad news again. The consultation starts with a question asking what 3 words describe planning. For me, those words should be consultative, professional, democratic. I'm not convinced that these words will describe planning in the future. So I ask the committee to fully explore this report and help us shape a response that firmly rejects these plans. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Just before I go to Karen to ask her to introduce the report, just wanted to clarify, I asked this to come onto the agenda for this on when the white paper came out, because obviously I knew members of the local plan committee would want to have some feedback. The process at present is that this is a white paper that's out for consultation. The council is obviously a consultee on that. We will be responding to that. There are other steps we can take as a council or as a committee, and that's up to people to decide. I know there's discussions going on about things what might happen at the next full council, but just so that, yeah, this was sort of, I would like to thank the officers for putting together this report, because I did have to do it quite quickly while actually processing and understanding the new white paper. So Karen, if you could just introduce it.
Thank you. I'll start with an apology because I don't do long presentations, but I'm afraid this has caused me to need to. So bear with me. I think what I'm intending to do is not go through the report, because that simply summarised 2 very detailed consultation papers, and hopefully you've had the chance to look at the reports. But what I wanted to do was highlight some of the areas that I think you'll be most concerned about. There are a few positives, I think. I'll come on to those, but the areas that I'm quite concerned about, and I think that you might be concerned about. So that's how I'll take us through it. So the first thing is zonal planning. Radical proposed changes to the local plan system, and if all land within the borough would be allocated into one of 3 zones: growth, renewal and protected zones. Sites allocated for growth would have automatic outline planning approval when the local plan was adopted. So that would establish the principle of development. Growth areas, according to the consultation paper, would be those suitable for substantial development. Although substantial isn't defined, it talks about new settlements and large areas, significant areas of growth. In renewal areas, there would be a statutory presumption in favour of development being granted for suitable uses. Renewal areas could cover existing built-up areas or town centres, those types of uses where smaller scale development is appropriate. Protected land would include areas like conservation areas, the AOMB, and parts of the open countryside that aren't allocated for other forms of development. Such, land like that is probably, that would change least in the government's proposals, with individual planning applications still being required to achieve permission. So moving to development management and planning applications, the proposal is to establish most planning policies, development management policies, at a national level using the MPPF. Now, I don't know about you, but I tend to think that we need policies that are different from even neighbouring authorities, let alone an authority in another part of the country. I think setting national policies does away with any of that local distinctiveness, really. Instead, the local planning authorities and neighbourhood plans as well would play a crucial role in producing design guides and design codes to provide certainty for future development. These design codes or design guides could be produced for the whole borough. They could be produced for certain areas or certain sites, but you can see the intention to produce them alongside the local plan really does away with this idea that the local plan system is being simplified. You'll simply have a twin track system at the same time. Then local plans are to be completed within 30 months. So we achieved it in Tiptree when we worked on the Tiptree Jam plan, but that was a limited area and had some local support, not all support, I must say, but we did achieve it then. But I think it's a tall order, personally. Especially with the zoning system, because it's not simply going to be 3 colours on a map. There's going to be a need for not only the design codes that I mentioned, but also some explanatory text to support those allocations. And we'd also need things like transport details and the environmental impact of proposals. And also we need to know how many houses each site will deliver, or how do we know that we've got an adequate supply? So I think there's a lot that needs to go into these documents. They're not as simple as people might first think. The consultation document says that for growth and renewal areas, the key accompanying text would set out the suitable development uses, as well as limitations such as height and density. But the document does set out 2 alternative options for this. One is to combine growth and renewal areas into one category and extend permission in principle to all land in this area. And then the land which would remain protected would be subject to planning applications as it is now. Or another approach would be to limit automatic permission in principle just to the growth areas rather than renewal areas as well. So that takes us on to permission in principle. And this proposes extending the current scope of permission in principle and extending it to major development. So at the moment, it's a route for developers of up to 10 units, but the plan is to extend it for applications up to 150 dwellings. So quite significant development, really. There's also a proposed fee structure, which would make it more attractive than an outline consent. So we still have as much work to do, but with less of a fee to cover the cost of doing that work. They also suggest minimal information is submitted with the permission in principle, but do accept maybe a limit on building height. There's been very little take-up of permission in principle since it was introduced in 2018, but the idea is they'll encourage more developers to do it by making it easier for them. So they'd get the principle of the use established before having to go to the cost of more detailed plans and studies. So housing numbers has already been mentioned several times tonight. The new standard requirement is likely to be one of the most significant changes proposed. And it will have regard now to the size of the existing settlement, the relative affordability of places. So the theory being historic undersupply would be addressed. So that would be something we wouldn't have to address, although looking at the 1,600 unit per year figure suggests, but we haven't been let off the hook on that completely. Also take into account land constraints, making better use of brownfield land, the allowance to provide for other forms of development, employment and the like, and the inclusion of an appropriate buffer. So that would only put the figure up higher. So we've heard that the methodology suggests a figure of just over 1,600 units a year for Colchester, which is a significant increase on the local plan figure and even the existing standard methodology figure. I think what it does do is suggest we need to get our local plan adopted before any changes, because that will then give us 5 years, during which time the white paper, in whatever form it materialises, will be adopted, and the white paper will introduce some constraints which might reduce the figure for us and for other authorities. Then there's a new infrastructure levy which combines section 106 and SIL. In principle, I think it's a good idea to combine the two processes. It would be based on a flat rate, value-based charge set nationally, and it would either be a single rate or area-specific rates. And it would be fixed on the final sales value of a development, or if it's a development, say for rent, then a value would be assessed at the point of completion. So it would be also levied at the point of occupation rather than up front, where it still is now. And it would take account of a minimum value, so schemes wouldn't be made unviable as a result. It also allows local authorities to borrow against expected income from the infrastructure levy. However, if the rate isn't fixed or is based on final sales values, how would you know what to borrow at the appropriate time to forward fund infrastructure? Because you don't know what those final sales values are going to be. Under the infrastructure levy, authorities would also be able to use funds raised to pay for affordable housing. This could be secured through development on site, so in kind, in theory, which could be mandatory where the local authority has a requirement. Local authorities would have a means to specify the form and tenure of the affordable housing, and to work with an affordable housing provider. And under this approach, the provider would purchase the dwelling at a discounted price in lieu of the section 106 planning obligation. The idea is, in effect, the difference would be sold to the provider from the cash liability to the levy. This would, in theory, create an incentive, apparently, for the developer to build on-site affordable housing. And to ensure developers are not rewarded for low standard homes under the levy, local authorities could have an option to revert back to cash contributions. But I'm not so sure that is an incentive, because I think some developers would probably rather pay the cash than have affordable homes on site. So we might not necessarily get the mixed use communities. Then move on to first homes and increasing the threshold below which developers do not need to provide affordable housing. So the government intends to set out in a policy that the minimum amount of 25% of all affordable housing will be in the form of first homes, which are discounted homes for sale. The minimum discount would be 30%. The local authorities would have the authority to increase that if evidence showed that it could be achieved to 40 or 50%. I suspect the bigger the discount, though, the less affordable rented properties could be delivered, and that's the real need in Colchester. So it would have a knock-on effect on that. The increasing the threshold to 40 or 50 units would also reduce the number of affordable homes delivered in the borough. The idea is that it will support small and medium developers. But I had a quick look at our housing trajectory and at the number of sites between 10 and 50. And there was about 750 units in that category, which even at 20% affordable housing would mean that we lost out on 150 affordable units. So that's, 150 homes that we wouldn't get for people on the housing needs register. Development management could be streamlined with firm deadlines and no extensions of time. At the moment, the extensions of time work for us and for developers who want to resolve things rather than receive a refusal. I think if there's penalties like those suggested, which is a return of planning fees or a deemed consent, there's probably going to be more refusals issued rather than face the consequences of non-determination within the time. Consultation and plan making will be digital, which is great for some people, but not for everybody. And we have to accept that. There's two opportunities for the public to comment on new local plans. At the start, when people can make suggestions for where development should go and what it should look like. And then at the end, when it's submitted to the inspector. So no opportunity to comment on a draft plan. And if you do comment when the plan goes for examination, there's a word limit. So beware. That's a positive in my way of thinking. But there's another alternative option, which I quite like the sound of as well, which removes the examination entirely and leaves it down to councils to do a self-assessment. So I said that's probably all sounded quite negative, and I think there are some positives hidden in there. The proposal certainly seemed to reinforce the plan-led system. The single statutory sustainable development test, in principle, could be preferable to the very complex sustainability appraisal system that we have now, the duty to cooperate and the test for deliverability. No more 5-year housing land supply arguments, because it would all be established at the local plan stage. There'll be a review of rural exception site policy, because it's considered not to be delivering enough houses at the moment. A quicker, simpler framework for assessing environmental impacts. I've talked about the infrastructure levy, more scope for spending, flexibility around spending the infrastructure levy, including it contributing to lowering council tax. So something to consider there. But it may be necessary, if that more flexible approach is introduced, to ring fence a certain amount for affordable housing, because if not, you could see that it would disappear. There's also a stronger emphasis on design, with each authority appointing a chief officer for design and placemaking, and strengthening support for climate change mitigation and protection of cultural and historic environment. So having said that, I'm going to listen to what everyone else has got to say about this. And after tonight, I'll start to draft responses, which are due in October, the first one on the 1st of October. I will circulate the drafts before formalising the portfolio holder report, so that people have the opportunity to review it. So I hope that's acceptable to everyone. My 3 words that sum up planning: protection, improvement and support. Over to you.
Thank you for that, Karen, and thank you for all the work you're doing on this at present. Yeah, like I said, I think as at the start, there is a consultation response being put together. What we say tonight will be fed into that. There's also, as that's being put together, if you've got especially more detailed comments, like the others, I think is it 29 questions, whatever, the set of questions as part of the consultation. If you've got any detailed comments, especially in response to specific questions, then that would be useful, I think. Email to Karen in there. I think some general points I just make the start. I think one issue I have with sort of having read through the white paper is that it makes this sort of reference right to being, the importance of data and being data-led, not document-led, and data has become very much a buzzword. It doesn't actually, I don't think it means what they think it means in a lot of points. A document is a thing that contains data. Say it's data-led, not document-led is nonsense in its face of it. But also, I find when someone talks about this must be data-led, and then the consultation, the white paper itself, makes a whole lot of claims about planning and the current system that doesn't have any evidence to back it up. It doesn't have any the data there to actually back up the points that are being made and the arguments being made. I find that quite frustrating. I think also this is connected to other discussions we've had, and another white paper that's coming out in the next few weeks on local government reorganisation. Because we have this talk about, these plans are going to be made. And one of the questions that needs to be answered as part of it is who is going to be making these plans and at what level? Because we can talk about local accountability. However, I've seen some suggestions where people have said we could have unitary authorities and Essex-wide combined authority, and the combined authority would have the planning power. So we would actually have the local plan being drawn up at an Essex-wide level rather than a local level. And so I think these are the sort of things we have to be, that need to be addressed as part of it. There's lots of flaws, I think, in the system. And I think the general problem we have is, I think, we all have frustrations with planning, either on the local plan level or just on the planning application level. It's part of being a councillor. We all have those frustrations, but I don't think throwing out the entire system and bringing in something entirely new is necessarily the way to achieve that. I think one thing that hasn't really been considered is there's lots of promises of things we're going to do with new systems and new data and new ways of consulting, all of which, when you read, you look at it, you're thinking that's a massive IT project, that's a massive IT project, that's a massive IT project, and all of which they seem to just assume can be introduced really quickly and with no problem. There's nothing in there about how the transition from one scheme to another. One thing I'm thinking is, if you want to do something like this, it would actually be best to sort of choose one area of the country, and I'm definitely not volunteering us for this, to trial it in. So if you convince this is a better way, then try it in one part of the country, and then you can roll it out from there, rather than everyone trying to switch and a lot of places trying to bring a whole new local plan in 30 months, which I think is going to create a lot of congestion in the system, especially in terms of all those specialists and consultants and assistants. We need to actually put together a plan. There's going to be a lot of people under a lot of demand at that point. I don't want to go on too long, and I want to give everyone else a chance to have their say. I've got 2 hands up, but then I'll go through the rest of the committees. I'll start with Councillor Moore, Councillor Luxford-Vaughan, and then I could see Councillor Scordis waving at me as well.
Oh, thank you again. Mine is a form of questions. Some of them have been partially answered by Karen, but I'd like to firmed up. First and most important and immediate is, how secure is our local plan? In other words, what are the risks that it's going to just collapse and we're going to find ourselves in the middle of this new system much faster than we wanted? That's question one. Question two is, who chooses the zones? And that, because that's very important. And if we are going to get caught up in a reshuffle, as you said, Chairman, we actually want to, before we can really comment on whether we think this is a good idea or not, we do need to know who's actually going to make those decisions for us. So who chooses the zones? Who chooses the design of the buildings? Is that, how local is it? again, that's another important issue. I mean, at face value, it seems to me that if you find yourself in a protected zone, that would be very good. But then I hear that there would still be local planning applications in the protected zone. So how protected is a protected zone? That's another thing that we don't know, which makes it very difficult to make a decision on. But perhaps we could just put these questions or uncertainties into our response. And also, how certain is this numbers, the 1612, how certain is that? Is that a supposition, or is that one we've actually got to, we've been told that's what it is and we've got to fight against it, or we've got to argue against it? Those are my uncertainties. I'll listen to the rest of the conversation and then see what comes up as far as recommendations are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll take a few comments and then go to Karen for a response generally rather than ping-ponging back and forth. So, Councillor Luxford-Vaughan.
Thank you, Chairman. What's interesting is I find myself in a very unusual situation, which I actually agree with most councillors, which is really refreshing, and hopefully we will take some strength from that position. I also wanted to thank Karen for the report in the agenda, which saved us all from reading the right paper ourselves, which I was grateful for. Funnily enough, I thought some of the objectives set out made a lot of sense. What I couldn't compute was how they then set out a series of suggestions that could address them. They just seemed totally unrelated things. So, you know, I think Karen has possibly covered most of my concerns, like, you know, we're going to completely ignore the the test of soundness and sustainability appraisals and the duty to cooperate. I mean, they're all bonkers suggestions, and the fact that they've been suggested in the first place is really quite worrying. I think also one of my pet hates is this first homes policy. I don't want to be political, but I do feel it's a great way of winning votes to sort of like allow people to get on the ladder. But actually, from everybody I've heard comments from, and I'm talking professionals via blogs and things, it's possibly the worst policy you could imagine. So, you know, the emphasis is on developers and landowners to pick up this 30% rebate, which they're just not going to do. And if they do, you're going to get really crap houses coming out of the back of it. I mean, they will push it back down to us. We will pay for that. You're pushing people that think this is opportunity to get on the housing ladder into a negative equity situation for their lifetime. I mean, you know, the 30% is passed on when you sell the house, so it doesn't really help anybody. But what's truly alarming is the fact that it's gone from 10% to 25%. I mean, you know, I have made my views very clear about the fact that I do not support the SPD that we have produced that says that new towns can escape delivering social rented in favour of help to buy schemes. Because clearly it's just saving money for developers. I mean, you know, if you build a house and you sell it on, even with a 30% discount, you still make more money than you do if you build a social rented house. And that's why I've never really supported our policy on the new towns to reduce that number. But certainly I don't relish the idea of going to going from 10% to 25%. And as Karen points out, that's not the need. The need in Colchester, Tendering and Braintree is for social rented houses. So it's a ridiculous policy, and we should fight it as hard as we possibly can. The only criticism I would make, and Karen, I do appreciate, is unbelievably complicated, is the way we are reaching the housing numbers that we've got. And I think I've possibly got my head round where we are on that. This is political. Algorithms are not the government's strong point, and this is just yet another disaster. But I would point out that every single major political party is trying to, has in their manifesto that they want to build these 300,000 homes per year, which is simply stupid. in my opinion. The need is for nearly half that, or more than half that. But you know, it's really quite stupid. I'm happy to. I think we've all received an email from Sir Bob Russell about asking our MPs to go back and lobby government on this. I can't imagine that they wouldn't support it. I think, you know, across the country, people are going to have very strong objections. My point that I would ask Karen to take consideration of is regard to fighting the housing numbers. They've said that we can argue back on constraints, but we're clearly not protected by having many areas of outstanding beauty or green belts, where other counties will have. So we need to attack on the fact that, you know, we don't have the infrastructure. The rail improvements have been noted, and there's no funding for them. Road provision is totally inadequate. We're desperately trying to get roads built, although I don't agree with them at all. But you know, there's no money for that. And also a simple thing, we are living in the biggest drought region in the country at the moment. The only suggestion I've heard for supplying water for the new garden community is pumping it from Leicestershire, which is bonkers. But if we can't argue that our constraints are very, very real, and that we already can't meet the demands that we need to, then you know, I don't know where we stand. But I think that's the angle that we should be going back on, talking about the constraints to this borough and also the wider region. That, you know, physically we're going to struggle to deliver 920 a year, and to double that is just ludicrous, in my opinion. And I've no doubt officers will be very keen to support arguing with the government on this, because ultimately I can't see that there's any point in having any kind of planning planning structure within our offices, because, you know, everything's disappearing. We're losing all control, and there won't be any work for them to do at the end of it. So, you know, I'm hoping that we can all agree that we should be fighting this in the strongest possible terms, and Colchester needs to develop a background on this, and that would be my final point, really.
Thank you, Councillor. Got Councillor Scordis, then Councillor Ellis.
Thanks, Chair. Having read the paper and Karen's report, and I've discussed it with portfolio members as well, these planning changes are deeply troubling, and I think we seem to all agree on that. As Councillor Fox has said, it will mean more housing, something that Colchester residents aren't too keen on. Poorer and denser builds, a lack of affordable homes, and essentially it's a free pass for developers. As Keir Starmer's already said, it's a developer's charter is the way this looks. The idea of growth zones is very disconcerting. It reads to me that on any area where we've allocated housing, that they will be able to build to unlimited numbers. We don't know whether that will mean high rises in the future, but it will more than likely mean denser, smaller properties, less green space, things that Colchester residents don't want. Areas like Middlewick, they were voted on because it capped the housing at 1,000. This could face 2,000 to 3,000 homes, depending when this land is sold. That would mean all that green space would be swallowed up. And it's also worrying that in these areas, developers can bypass planning, as has been discussed. That offers no real accountability or any resident input, while these plans claim to be democratic. So it's completely the opposite, and it does raise questions over Section 2, and Councillor Moore's asked a question on that, so it'll be interesting to hear that, but I won't be surprised if that information hasn't been provided by the government of how it'll work once we do adopt a local plan. Chair, you mentioned data, and that's very important. Data can be manipulated, or it can be omitted to reach an agenda. So there's ways the government will do that, and I wouldn't be surprised with Dominic Cummings in government. I mean, I think it's a case here that a planning system, we can all agree it's not perfect, but it's not broken as well. I can understand points in the white paper about a lack of trust in the system, and I think we've all encountered that. People get very angry when they make an objection and it gets passed by the panel without little discussion. And to be honest, the system is far too complex for a regular layperson. They don't really have the time to go into that. And we devote that time as councillors to be trained on planning and follow the law. We also know that Section 106 isn't perfect. We've got issues in my ward with developers not shelling out for some of the money that they owe us. But it does give, from what we've seen, it gives us more money than SIL. If the government are going to change these, change community money, such as 106 or SIL, they need to tighten the rules. So it's not in the hands of developers. The developer can't claim poverty to stop vital infrastructure or affordable housing being built. And about the local plan, reducing the time it takes to build a local plan. You know, we all know how long the local plan can take. We've sat on enough 5 or 6 hour meetings of the local plan to know how complex it can be, but that's the whole point. It's very complex. Some of us pick up points that aren't always taken seen by the officers initially, or we have plenty of residents come along, or residents groups that have been set up to highlight real issues, and it does become very democratic, and we have to try and get it right, and that is a very complex thing to do. So reducing the time limit on building a local plan is quite worrying. As Karen said, with Tiptree, that was doable because it was a smaller site. We're talking about the whole borough of Colchester. There are some positives in this paper. I think the whole idea of bringing planning into the 21st century is something I think we can all welcome if it's done in the right way. I think having standardized maps that the average resident can kind of scrutinize is a good thing. Having community consultation at the planning stage is also, I think, positive if we want to make it much more democratic, much more community led. So I don't have an issue with that. First homes has already been discussed. When you first read it, and I think Councillor Luxford-Vaughan made a good point about it being quite a good political point the government can put out. You first read it, it seems brilliant. Key workers, they've done a fantastic job. Here's a house. But actually, we know that's not the reality. It essentially omits any talk of affordable housing. We know that we actually need more socially rented housing than anything for people on lower wages. And there's no guarantees in the paper that developers can get out of paying it. The complaint can say that it's not financially viable. So that is a real worry as well. One thing I did pick up on as well, there's very little mention of much more kind of renewable homes in a green sense, having renewable energy. So there's no mention of, say, having solar panels on homes, which is a very quick win the government can make, especially when they're trying to cut down emissions. I think it's 2040 the government target is. And you can have insulation as a prerequisite and recycled water. That could be all down in every house for the developer to do. And the point has been made, a big onus falls upon our 3 MPs, Will Quince, Bernard Jenkins, Priti Patel. Priti Patel herself has been highly critical of Colchester, the local plan and building in Tollgate. Bernard Jenkins has been pointed out as quite absurdly tried to say that no housing should be built in Mersey because he sent a nice letter to us and clearly has no understanding of the planning system. While Will Quince tends to blame Colchester for any housing allocations when he gets an email about someone moaning about development. So they've all been highly critical of CBC. So now is the time for them to actually step up to the plate. Are they going to talk the talk? Are they going to walk the walk? 2 of them are in positions in government. One of them, one of the most powerful positions in government. But if she wants to protect her part of the constituency that's within Colchester, we need to hear from her. We need her to vote this down. We have to remember this is under the Dominic Cummings style government. So they're going to try and push this through without any sort of more consultation. I think the comments we'll put in October will probably be the last chance we actually get of an input of this. unless MPs, like our local MPs, revolt. Chair, as far as comments go for this white paper, what I've suggested is, written a few notes, is we welcome any changes that engage the community and help planning more community-led and democratic. Hopefully Jan can get that down. We welcome changes to make the system more standardised and to make the access easier for residents. We note the lack of green policies in this document, and we'd like to see it become mandatory for future households to have solar panels, insulation and recycled water implements installed. Hopefully most agree with the next one. We do not support plans of growth areas and automatic planning approval, which we feel goes against the aims to make planning more accessible for the local community and will lead to poor quality of housing. We do not support a national policy framework, preferring a local framework to meet local needs. Arguably democratise it as well. We do not support the new housing formula, which will dramatically increase the number of homes to be built in Colchester. And we note our concerns about the absence of social housing, which is desperately needed to tackle the housing crisis we face. And I was going to suggest as an action, which I think others have mentioned as well, is if as a panel chair, that we write to the MPs as a panel, whether it's just as chair or as a united panel, to ask them to essentially vote this down or speak out against it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Scott. Thank you, Councillor Scordis. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. We had quite a long discussion about this in the briefing, and I'll probably repeat some of that. Firstly, the government seems to be coming at this from the premise that the planning system is broken, which is not. And if I had to answer the first, what 3 words sum up planning currently, as I said in the briefing, it's not broken, is probably what I would say. That said, the government's been saying for quite some time that they're going to come forward with some radical changes. They certainly haven't held back. To be welcomed, I guess, is that there's quite a lot of the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission work has gone into this paper. That's something I've been particularly interested in and keen on. Unwelcome is that they appear, although I'd like Karen to give some clarification around this calculation and where it's come from. I know Lichfields have done this work, but exactly where we've got the figure of 1612 from. We have this bizarre calculation which puts an enormous amount of housing into Colchester, potentially. I guess you reap what you sow. If you've been going to the government and telling them you can build vast quantities of housing, as this administration has over the last few years, it's going to be difficult to argue against it and say that we can't accommodate it, but we clearly can't accommodate it. Boris Johnson's speech, I think it was called Build, Build, Build. I'd say probably we need to be looking at convert, convert, convert post-COVID. I've been arguing for years that we should be building in the town centre of Colchester. At the end of the day, I think that because of COVID, we're going to see radical changes to the way that towns work around the country. I think you're going to find you will find a lot more retail closures, unfortunately, but it's going to happen. I know a lot of businesses personally that are going to be stopping using their offices, whether it's in Colchester or elsewhere, because they've discovered miraculously, it's one of the positives, if you can take any positives from this pandemic, is that there are other ways of working. and their workers can work from home and have done so successfully. It's something that Ian Vipond argued with me about when I was discussing the new towns or garden communities, whatever you want to call them. And actually, it's true, people can work from home, although when we develop new homes, we're going to have to legislate for that fact. We're going to have to build home offices, I think, in everything that you build. However, it is going to change the way that that towns develop over time, I think, going forward, which is why I'd say it's convert, convert, convert rather than build, build, build. As far as comments that have already been made, I think it was Councillor Fox who talked about it. I may be mistaken, sorry if I've got it wrong. The poor quality of conversions that we've been seeing, I think it was you, Councillor Fox, that we've been seeing to date means that actually we need some really strong policy around around these conversions and the right to be able to develop in that way. I'm appalled actually at the, as you say, at the windowless rooms that people have been able to live in and shouldn't be able to live in. But I think there are opportunities to get people back into the town of Colchester and other towns, help those towns survive and thrive, because people will be using the services and facilities within that town, and you're putting people back where they should be, which is living in the towns as well as the countryside. I've put all sorts of notes down here because people have been saying, as I said, there's been some good things with the building beautiful, building better, building beautiful. We've had the Essex Design Guide. I've been quite critical of that. I think it was a good thing to start with, but it seems to have been adopted nigh on countrywide, as I've said before, because you can walk around, you can go to almost any town in the country now with a blindfold on. Take that blindfold off and I'll just tell you you're in North Colchester or in Stanley. I won't have a clue. If I'm not looking at the surrounding countryside or I can't see it, they're all absolutely similar. I don't know what's going on my telephone. That's gone mad. So we've ended up with some fairly soulless, fairly unattractive development, I think. That's not being disrespectful to properties that people have purchased, but I'm just saying throughout Colchester, the design has let us down. Therefore, one of the positives that I see from this paper is the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission's work, and the fact that they are looking at these design codes, and they're looking at, I know, Karen, you're saying it's going to make life quite difficult for you guys, and we're going to have to work out how that would work, but local design codes where residents can get involved from the get-go, hopefully, and we do get the right sort of houses that fit in the the various different areas. And we've got quite diverse areas just within Colchester, let alone the country. That I think is a positive. So I've put another thing about calculations here. I really need to get this calculation bottomed out, Karen, because I'm not fully understanding where the 1612 has come from. I'm not disputing it, but I'm not sure that it's a government calculation yet. This is a bit of modelling that's been done by a consultant. Radically rethinking how the local authorities produce local plans. So they've put profoundly reinventing the ambition, depth and breadth with which we try to engage with communities. That's a good thing. That has to be a good thing. Engaging with communities from the get-go is a good thing. However, what concerns me is this zoning issue, and the fact that every community we talk to is going to say they want to be protected. I would suspect there are going to be very few communities that say they want to be a growth community. We'll see, but it will end up with, it's us that's zoning it, I believe. It's not government that's zoning it, is it? It's us that's going to be designated the zoning. So we will have to zone in different areas in different ways. Some people are going to be very upset, some won't be, some will be. But it seems to me actually the part that the residents are really going to get involved with is choosing the colour of the curtains on the new dwellings that have been built, rather than whether or not development in principle in that area is the right thing to do. And they're so prescriptive in saying, it's growth, and it's growth in a big way. or protected or what have you. I can't agree with it. First homes. I've missed something, Karen. If we've had a consultation on first homes, I read our consultation response. I was really pleased with it. It's another bonkers idea, perfectly honestly. As in, it's not necessarily bonkers. I think their heart's in the right place. I just think it's going to be it's really difficult to execute it. When you actually do a reality check on it, have we actually got, has first homes become policy now? It's all over this thing that 25% of affordable housing has got to be first homes. Starter homes was nigh on every scheme governments of any colour have come up with to produce this sort of housing to get people on the housing ladder has not been successful. I'd like to know why this one will be, and how they're writing into policy that it's going to be, we have to have 25% of affordable housing has got to be these first homes. Doesn't make sense to me. As Andrew Luxford-Vaughan and others have said, we've got a very specific calculation that we've done. We argued against the 10% in the garden communities. We're having to do this in 10%. The 80% affordable rent and 20% affordable homes to buy or own with various methods of home ownership. With the first home scheme, have developers actually signed up to taking on this 30% or 40% or 50% equity in the homes that they are selling? How's that carried on their books? Sorry, I may have missed something if that has actually now fully gone through. Councillor Fox will nod or shake his head at me, I'm sure, to say whether he's shrugging his shoulders at me. So, he hasn't seen it either necessarily. It's just an incredible frustration. From the point of view of putting something together, Councillor Scordis has put a few words together. I'm not going to do that this evening. Karen, you're our planning expert. I'm going to say I think I can be quite scathing about officers at times, and I don't mean to be. It's just sometimes I think, as Councillor Scordis has mentioned this evening, residents and community groups, and actually some people should get listened to when maybe they're not. However, you are our planning expert, and I think it would be a really useful exercise if you do, as you've said you're going to do, put together a response. What you've been saying this evening tallies with what I'm thinking, so I can't see that we're going to be a million miles apart. I'm really appreciative, and obviously you will have had a word with the portfolio holder to agree that you can give us something in advance of that being submitted. I'd dearly love to have another nickname like this, another local plan meeting, perhaps a briefing rather than necessarily a full-blown meeting. Those of us that wish to attend that could attend that and actually just go through your responses on a para by para basis. I mean, you can obviously have given us an advanced thing of it, but I think rather than individually coming back, it would be quite useful to have a roundtable discussion on what we think. There are some real positives in this white paper, but I think again it's Councillor Luxford-Vaughan has said it. It's while the objectives are good, the execution is not so good. Is probably a polite way of saying it. It's probably the closest I've come to walking away from a political party. Reading this and their intentions. I've spent some years, as you all know, fighting against development in what I considered the wrong way and the wrong place. Keir Starmer isn't the person that came up with the term developers charter. It was bandied all over the place very quickly as soon as this paper was produced. But there are some positives in it. And there are far too many negatives, unfortunately, as I see it currently. I'm perfectly happy that we lobby our MPs. I know they've been spoken to before. I'm slightly disappointed someone talked about one of our members who's not here this evening, was championing the white paper. They weren't at all. That particular member is very keen on local government reform. I might not be keen on that either, to be honest, which is why I'm in the position I'm in at the minute. What he I think was championing is the first part of it, where he was reading about local community involvement and where local communities would be consulted and would be involved very early in the process. That's a long way before you start, I think, in the following days getting Lichfield's reports about how many houses it could actually mean for Colchester and what this new model would mean. There are some positives, as I say, but there are too many negatives. I'd be really appreciative to have site as you've offered, Karen, and I'd really appreciate a briefing session or a meeting for us to discuss them further, because this is too important an issue just to not to take time to talk about it some more once we've seen those responses. And I think you're on exactly the track that we're on at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I get to Karen, just to respond to some of the points made, and then I'll come to the other councillors. Just on two things that have been raised. I think first, what Andrew said there, I think maybe a briefing would probably be more useful than a meeting. I think as well with the briefing, we can then bring in Councillor Young, Councillor Fox, Councillor Corey, those members of the Cabinet who are involved in this, because it is the consultation is a portfolio holder response. So it comes with that. It probably would be more useful having a briefing where we can do that and sort of a round table and kick things around a lot more rather than the formal meeting. And it's been raised by a couple of members about lobbying the MPs, whether we want to sort of leave that to later or do it now. I'm happy to write, if the committee, on behalf of the committee, just want to say, ask them to use their influence. I'll run the content of any letter by spokespersons and that before I'd send it. But I'll just put that out there now as a thought, but I'll pass on to Karen to answer any questions, and I'll go to the other members of the committee.
Thank you. There was quite a lot of points made as opposed to questions, but there are a few questions which I'll attempt to answer. How secure is our local plan? I can't give you an answer on that because we've got Section 1 modifications, consultation. Inspectors have been appointed for Section 2 examination. They've already sent a letter about preparing topic papers. So we are progressing it, and it's progressing with speed, I would say, but it can only progress so far until we know the outcome of Section 1. So we're in the hands of Mr. Clues at the moment on that. Who chooses the zones? Well, that is each individual council. Who chooses the design? Again, that's us. And both those processes are intended to involve local residents and communities. How protected is protected? Well, I think protected is about the same as now. That's the one sort of constant, really, that you have to make an application, and that's considered on its merits against policies, whether they be national policies or local policies. But that's about the same as now, I would say. And how certain is the housing number ties into one of Andrew's questions about the housing number. Well, that figure of 1,612 was first published by Lichfields. Stantec, who are our consultants on housing issues, came up with the same number. What they've done is use the methodology. Don't forget, there's two documents here. There's the white paper, and there's also the changes to planning, which is intended to address some items or some matters in the short term. So in terms of the standard methodology, the white, which way round? Standard methodology, in the changes document, which is short term, it sets out a methodology, and that has been used to come up with the 1,612. figure. What the white paper will do is actually set out in legislation how constraints are factored into that calculation. At the moment, they're not. It's just a standard figure. Now, as Andrea said, we haven't got Greenbelt, and there's only a certain amount of AOMB and conservation areas. So we do need to hope that constraints include infrastructure constraints and things like that. So we don't know what the figure in the white paper will be, is the answer. But short term, that is the figure that's set out in the changes document. Policies about conversions. We can't have policies where it's permitted development. That's the trouble, and that's why we've seen so many. We've seen some poor quality housing developments because we can't control them. First homes, it's not yet policy, but again, it's in the changes to the planning system document, which means the intention is to introduce it sooner rather than later. What they've said in that document is they'll introduce it through PPG to start with, and then keep an eye on things. And if need be, they will use legislation to enforce it. But at the moment, it is neither, but could be introduced through the PPG quite quickly. And I think that's all the questions answered. And personally, I wouldn't mind a 5-minute break if we're going to go round everyone else. I don't want to prolong things, but 5 minutes would be convenient.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I was just about to apologise for that. I was just going to suggest, I have Councillor Hayter-Bourne and Willett who haven't spoken. I'm sure they want to contribute something to this. So I will suggest a very quick break. I'm very sorry, I got to that point where we'd got to almost 8 o'clock and I should have taken a break there, and I thought, oh, we wouldn't be as long, and then obviously things, I forget with local plan how long we can tend to stretch things for. So we'll just a very quick 5-minute break now, and literally 5 minutes, and then we'll come back to the other councillors and any other points we have.
Thanks, Chairman. Can I just remind members to mute their microphones and turn their videos off, well, because the stream remains live whilst we have a break.
Okay, are we? Are we ready to start again? I'm seeing live video screens from everyone. Can you hear me? So I had councillors hadn't spoken for the break. I'll take in the order I can see on my screen just to come around to you. That would be Councillor Hayter, then Councillor Bourne, then Councillor Willett. So Councillor Hayter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. Obviously, we've gone through quite a bit already, which is great. It's building on something that Councillor Fox said earlier and Councillor Ellis about the permitted development. And if that's too loose, how bad that could actually impact builds and extensions to houses and what have you. I've got experience of this firsthand in a previous career where part of my job was to actually check the regs that they were going on with what clients are trying to build. And it is frightening what you see that people try and get away with. And unless it's very robust, this process going forward, then it could really be a problem. You know, with immediate builds, with potential builds and sales down the line. Where I've heard this evening, a couple of councillors have said what some people might judge as a horror story about no windows, this and that. That's true. That will happen. I have been on properties where people are trying to do this. So my big concern with permitted development being loosened up is there'll be a small loophole somewhere. And trust me, a lot of people will take advantage of it, whether it be individuals or developers. So it's something I'm very keen to see that it is examined closely there. The other point is regarding the 1600 number, which is a massive number for Colchester. You know, we have high numbers now as it is. What I don't think anyone's mentioned tonight so far is neighbouring authorities that are building on our boundaries. Now, we've already got it happening. So not only would we have potentially the 1600, but we'd also have another authority potentially dumping their allocations right on our doorstep, challenging our infrastructure, which is struggling now as it is. So when we talk about where these houses potentially could go, that's a big concern, because before you know it, you're looking at well over 2,000. I don't think anyone's mentioned it yet, but that's a concern for me. I can see that happening, and it's a bit of a worry there, but that's what I've got. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hayter. Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of residents, if you talk to them, or even if you don't talk to them, and you look at some social media feed, think we're rubbish. They think councillors are rubbish. And although they may not have a view about politics, they have a view about planning and development. I think everybody in Colchester has a view about planning and development. So I think my 3 words would be, it has to be fair, has to be sustainable, and it has to be coherent. And that's one of the problems with planning currently. It's not coherent. Members of the public don't understand. We struggle to understand ourselves how developments get going. How on earth can we explain to the general public how development works? Who can object? What grounds for objection are? How did this policy get there in the first place? We have a local plan committee that we're, 10 minutes away from 3 hours. We've had lots of local plan committees before. We have planning committees. And all of them are quite long. And the documentation is turgid sometimes to go through. It really is. So I would have expected any overhaul of the planning system has to meet the test of fairness, the test of sustainability, and the test of coherence. And this doesn't. Planning for the future, in my book, doesn't meet any of those 3 tests. Okay, I admit they're my tests. Other people will have other priorities. But I think what we do have in Colchester is we have residents who are acutely aware of the impact of housing and other development on their lives. And they are not prepared to put up with any more changes that are incoherent. This planning for the future is incoherent. And why do I say that? Well, I don't want to demonise developers. I don't want to demonise any new housing build or any groups of tenants, leaseholders or home occupiers. And I don't think it's helpful to use the language of dumping their allocations next to our borders. That's a little bit too Little Englander for my liking. I don't think it's helpful. It sets up planning, I think, is one of the biggest problems we have. It sets up a them and us combative nature. We're not having this here, so you're going to have it over there. And that will be a problem when we look at local growth areas or local growth zones, because if each council is going to decide those ourselves, we might think, well, hey, what a great idea. As a council, we're going to say the growth zone is over here. Well, how is that going to be sorted out amongst 51 councillors? It doesn't have to be Colchester, but we have 51 councillors who don't want the growth zone to be in their ward, don't want the growth zone to be next to their ward. It's not a good way of working things out, which goes back to the coherence again. I think a good test for planning is not what it does for people who have houses, not what it does for people who can afford housing. Good planning is a bit like a good universal credit system. It's what it does for the people who need it the most, and that's the vulnerable. What does this planning document do for the people that need suitable housing? What about individuals and families with learning disabilities? What about those with physical disabilities? What about the isolated elderly and the socially active elderly? What about those who have no housing, insecure tenancies, who are sofa surfing, who are rough sleeping at different times of the year? What about private renters who are in substandard accommodation? What about asylum seekers? What about ex-armed forces personnel? What about ex-offenders coming out and being on probation, needing secure housing? What about those who have no recourse to public funds? I don't think anything in this Planning for the Future document addresses the people who need housing the most, and therefore the people that need us, councillors. We may be rubbish, but we're going to be putting forward some of the solutions to this. This planning white paper is not a solution to this. In fact, it makes it even worse. And I cannot understand how the government, who had enough time to think about this, and who frankly have got enough problems at the moment to deal with post-COVID, have come up with the most unpalatable set of options that you could possibly put in one white paper. It's almost like they've chucked a menu together of things that they'll think, oh, not even our own councillors in our own party will agree to this. They couldn't have come up with anything more unlikely. So why would they do that? Are they as bad as some developers riding roughshod over the British public? Or do they have a total disregard for anything anyone ever thinks? I don't know. I think it was almost something that was dreamed up pre-COVID and hasn't responded to the challenges in a post-COVID era. We've got enough challenges in local government. We're going to be having a reorganisation. We're having this planning white paper. We're having changes to permitted development. There is a lot going on. We don't need any of this. Yes, planning does need to be changed. Yes, it needs to be explained a lot better to people, because the general public think that we as councillors are taking brown envelopes full of cash because they don't understand the planning development rules. And they're still not going to be able to understand them under the Planning for the Future white paper. So I want to see planning that addresses the needs of the most vulnerable, because if we can do that, then we'll create spaces where people can not just exist, but they can live their lives and they can move on to other suitable accommodation as and when within a community that works. Because the worst thing we have in planning up and down the country are put together developments that just don't work. We need something that works, something that's coherent, something that's fair, and something that's sustainable. And if you can get any of those words into any of our responses, I'll be very happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bourne. Councillor Willits.
Chairman, this particular document on which we're consulting is very much like the curate's egg. There are elements of it where there is a degree of truth. There does need to be change. We've all complained about the way the existing planning system works. But on the other hand, as happens with any set of good ideas, they go too far in certain areas. I believe that change in the planning system is long overdue. That isn't to say that I support everything in this white paper. I support only a very small proportion of it. But I think most people will realistically say that looking at the way the planning system works at the moment, change is overdue. Thinking back to the local plan, Chairman, we had documents on sustainability, documents on viability. They were written for experts to be read only by experts. And no matter how many hours you'd got, it was really heavy going to try and understand them. And the problem doesn't end there. I mean, recently I was looking at a planning application for 100 or so houses in my ward. 400 documents suddenly appear on the planning system. Many of them seem quite esoteric. Perhaps they're not when you get down to them, if you've got sufficient hours in the day to start reading them all. But it is a nightmare to carry out one's job as a local ward councillor and try and just wade through all the planning documents that support the number of planning applications which we get. People feel that their consultations is for nothing. They spend time filling in forms on the local plan saying what they think about it. They spend time filling in the web forms for planning applications in ward, and they get the feeling, and it may be wrong, but they get the feeling that consultation is just a matter of form. You tick the box, you fill in the form, and as the tax inspector says, your comments are noted but ignored. Or all too often with what we have. I mean, the local plan, it was supposed to be ready in 2017, and we're still working on it. Huge delays at getting really important documents out of the council because of the complexity and the difficulty of just carrying out those things which we are required to do by law. So some of it I will support, a lot of it I will not support. What I will definitely not support, and I consider is frightfully dangerous, is the housing formula, where this number of 1,612 has been plucked out of the air, although we have difficulty meeting 920, although we've just about done it on a consistent basis over the last decade. I can understand the frustration which government has with the planning system. I mean, they see internal growth, which requires, because of the way families and households have changed over the last 5 years, they see a greater demand for housing. The number of housings per household, the number of people per household has fallen, so we need more housing. Up to COVID, we were still seeing people flood into the country from abroad. Now, I'm not arguing whether that's a good or a bad thing. I'm just stating as a fact that people were coming in and they need houses. They can't live in a shoebox on the central reservation of the M6 as they do equivalently in other countries. They've got to have housing. Lack of housing just means that the price continues to rocket. And one can understand the frustration of government that they have had a long-standing target of 300,000 houses a year, but I think last year it was about 122,000 was all that could be delivered. So from their point of view, there is frustration. From our point of view, there is frustration with the existing system, even more frustration when anyone proposes any changes to the current system. So I do believe that we should be working together, as was suggested by the very first speaker on this particular subject. But working together means more than just telling other people what they should be doing. We should also be looking internally, because we hear a lot of speech with forked tongues in this council, Chairman. The Liberal Democrat and Labour coalition, who are running things at the moment, have told government on numerous occasions that Colchester can accommodate and can deliver at least a further 30,000 houses in 2 new towns in the east and west of the borough. This is in addition to the 920 homes per year which we have traditionally delivered over the last 2 decades in the local plan. And I would suggest, Chairman, that once that genie was out of the bottle, it was going to be very difficult to put it back and say, no, we can't deliver 30,000 houses if that's what we're asked to do. It's just impossible, cannot be done, because we've already told government. Now, we on the Conservative benches have been rather circumspect about it, but the other parties on this council have been talking about the vanity projects, which involve large housing numbers, going to ministers and talking in Whitehall about what can be done. And all of a sudden, we start seeing that reflected in potential housing numbers, and we all suddenly get very scared. And even after the senior government planning inspector reported that the plans for 30,000 houses were uneconomically, or they were economically unviable, and that the number proposed were unsustainable, the Liberal Democrat and Labour coalition continue to tell government, or so we hear, that the garden community plans can be delivered. Well, you can't argue it both ways. And if we're going to argue that 1,612 is an unattainable target, let's not keep telling government that they can have their garden communities. So I believe that getting the numbers down would be much easier if the council's controlling Liberal Democrat and Labour administration, who, after all, Chairman, speak on behalf of the residents of the borough, whether you like it or not, if they cease supporting the idea of mega development programmes in the borough, and we all started to concentrate on reining it in and showing that there is no possibility of developing more than 920 a year. So in terms of our comments, I think we should comment sincerely on the need for planning reform, which parts of it we like, which parts of it we don't like, which parts of it we think would be very counterproductive. We should comment strongly on the disastrous nature of the housing formula and the fact that that it's almost being egged on by our local authority that we can deliver huge numbers. I would strongly support lobbying our MPs. That's the natural place to start, because they actually own the consultation and the white paper that would come about. So those are the 2 important actions we need to take. Lobby our MPs with really coherent arguments about why parts of the white paper are wrong. And internally, we must abandon the garden communities project, because it undermines all the arguments we have about bringing down the housing number. So those are the 2 actions we need. Lobby the MPs and abandon the mega development which is encompassed in the garden communities. They just say it's wrong, it was a vanity project, should never have been proposed in the first place, and all we can do is continue delivering 920 houses per year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Willits. I don't see any other hands up or anything, so we're asking this one. We won't actually have to vote on anything, just to provide comments on the consultation documents, which then feed into the response, which I know the officers will have picked up on and will be ready to add into that. I think the one thing that did have support was definitely having a further briefing meeting on this. We'll need to see if we can sort out a time for that and when that will be, but I think a briefing is better than having another meeting of the committee. I think rather than organising another meeting of the committee. I think a briefing where we can look at it much more in a round table aspects and bring in different voices, not just this committee. We can discuss it more with the cabinet members and the officers there as well, and actually look at when we've got a bit more meat on the bones of the consultation. I think on the second point, the one that's been raised, the idea of lobbying the MPs, being in contact with the MPs, the question is, do the committee want me to do that on behalf of the committee, to write to them with sort of an initial response on behalf of the committee, or do we want to wait until we have a council response on that? I'm happy to draft a letter. It wouldn't be sort of in full depth. It would be sort of, this is our initial opinions. We would like you to take this up and take some action on them. Our fuller response as a council will come later, and I'd run that by group spokes before anything got sent off, so it wouldn't be there. But I can see Councillor Luxford-Vaughan and Councillor Willits.
Just to say, Chair, I think, to get the initial support would definitely be the right route, because we need some time to consider our response. So I'm happy to support. I know I'm a visitor on this committee, but I think this is an issue for all councillors, and I certainly would like to know immediately that our MPs are prepared to support Essex, basically.
Thank you. Councillor Willits and then Councillor Ellis.
Chairman, I believe that the proposed housing formula is so disastrous that we have to start right from today making our view known to government. And I would certainly support a letter from you if it is going to major on the topic of unacceptable housing numbers and some of the main principal arguments that will be coming forward. I think you should be laying the ground to say that the local plan committee has sort of severe concerns about the housing formula. We mustn't let a day pass without getting that message off to our MPs so that they fully know what we think about it.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis.
I love that the two visiting councillors are the first people in there with that. I wouldn't disagree with that at all, Chairman. I'm very happy if you want to get something off. I quite like sight of it. I think Councillor Willits is right. You've got to major on the certainly the housing formula, because I still don't understand, as Karen's already said this evening, they're using there are two calculations going on here. We're not sure which one they're going to use. We don't understand the constraints, how that'll change it. We're just seeing something in its sort of unedited form. And I think we need to make it very, very clear to them that that's entirely unacceptable to Colchester. And they need a reality check. It's completely undeliverable as well. So that and some of the main points that have been made this evening. And I just wanted to mention that briefing, I'm very keen on having one. Obviously, after Karen has got a first draft done, I don't want to, her to have to endure a briefing before she's had a chance to get that work done. And then we've got an opportunity to have a look. She's heard what's been said this evening by members. And I think we've been acting as an echo chamber for her. She made her presentation at the beginning and was saying a lot of the things I think that we've been saying, maybe in slightly more officer terms, because she can or has to be. And maybe we're not always quite as politically diplomatic as we might be. But hey, so yeah, briefing. Happy with that. Doesn't have to be a full meeting, but after Karen's got that piece of work done. Okay, and definitely start lobbying the MPs now. Some of us have been already, but doing it through official channels would be a very good thing.
Yeah, thank you there. Yeah, obviously any letter I'll run it at least around the spokesman, maybe send it out to the whole committee before it gets sent off. But like I said, we need to do that quickly, so hopefully we could maybe get something done by the end of the week. Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think a letter asking about the rationale that went behind the housing formula, the extended housing formula, would be useful. we all love an algorithm these days, so it would be good to know what the rationale was before you put your inputs in and get your outputs out. Of course, the 1,600 per year, it's worth mentioning that without a garden community would mean that those 1,600 properties would have to be dotted all around the borough every year, 1,600. So that's quite an ask without a larger development going on with infrastructure. And please, could you accentuate our disgust at the permitted development extension, because we don't believe that in Colchester that's going to deliver fair and accessible housing for all that need it, particularly vulnerable people. In fact, the permitted development will provide, well, is highly dangerous. We heard that from Councillor Hayter tonight, is going to provide poor quality housing for vulnerable people. That's all it does. Not happy about that at all.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ellis again.
I'm being really annoying because actually Councillor Bourne's made a really good point. Permitted development, Karen came back, I think, in an answer to me, because I'd been banging on about permitted development as well. I think it's a real opportunity, and I think the government need to understand that there is a huge opportunity coming, and actually I'm sure MHCLG do understand, or I gather they do. There's a huge opportunity coming, that there is a new normal. We are going to be changing the way we live, work and play. And you will see retail premises and business premises being converted, need to be changed into residential. It is going to happen come what may. Therefore, it's really, really important that we get something sorted on this permitted development thing now. We should be saying to government, you cannot do it in this way. There has to be some really strict, that's why I was talking about strict policies around it. We've got to get it right. It's an opportunity to do some great things, I think, putting people back into towns and helping towns survive and thrive. I think they will do that with people living in them, dependent on them. But if you do it the way that Councillor Bourne has just described and Councillor Hayter has spoken about and Adam Fox spoke about earlier, it will be an unmitigated disaster. So grasp the opportunity and do something positive, and don't let it be a disaster. And if that means that we've got to lobby in some separate way about that, then we do so. But actually, because they're almost two separate issues, but because they're conjoined because they've come out at the same time, but they are sort of two different papers, so to speak, the planning changes and the planning for the future. Maybe take advice from Karen, but we need to work quite hard on this quite quickly to make sure that we don't see this appalling sort of development in Colchester, but we do seize it as an opportunity to do something really positive for our town. And I think it's there to be taken, but I'm worried like hell that we're going to see what has been described by other councillors this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. And Councillor Luxford-Vaughan.
I just wanted to correct Councillor Bourne about the statement she made on the garden communities. To achieve the 920, we don't need to build any houses in the garden communities, and I think it's wrong to suggest that isn't the case. If we're going to get this plan adopted, none of those numbers are actually needed, and I would also suggest that the reason why our numbers are so high is because the starting point is what we've delivered in the past, and we have consistently over delivered for the last 15 years, and I think it's important to take that on board now, that this over delivery and the garden communities being an over delivery is one of the problems that we've that we've put on ourselves actually.
Okay, before we go on to another debate there, I think we've now covered all the points. Won't be tonight, it'll be tomorrow. I will draft a letter. We'll then look at organising the briefing, which will be some point in later in September, I would assume. And we'll get back to people on there. But yeah, we've done, I can see Richard has his hand up, so
Yeah, could I just get a steer from you on the membership of the briefing? Were you looking for an all-member briefing or local plan cabinet planning committee? Just be grateful, just so we know who to invite, as it were.
Yeah, I think we're going to need to discuss that a bit more offline. About it's definitely sort of local plan and the key cabinet members there. I think whoever else, we may be sort of drawing up an invite list. I'm not sure if Councillor Ellis is trying to get my attention there or not, but.
Sorry, Chair. Well, it's actually almost in the gift of. I think it's in the gift of the portfolio holder rather than us. I think it's something that we're asking for, but this is a portfolio holder response, isn't it? So, I guess you'd have cabinet if you wanted to have cabinet, and you'd have us if you wanted to have us. How widely you throw it open it could be an incredibly long meeting because people like Councillor Bourne like to talk a lot. Fortunately, I'm quite a quiet person that doesn't say very much. But seriously, I think I'd take some advice from Karen and take some advice from the portfolio holder because it's her report and her submission, which Karen's obviously going to be writing, but with some input from us.
Okay, is that helpful, Richard?
That's very helpful, thank you.
Okay, we don't have to take a vote on anything because we've provided our comments and opinions on that. It wasn't anything to vote on. So,
Chair, I would suggest that given that you're making recommendations or resolutions, sorry, to write to the MPs and also to recommend the statement of the briefing, I think it would be appropriate to take a vote.
Okay, yeah, that I'll accept. So, yeah, we could just take a vote on those, yeah, to have the briefing and for me to write the letter and get that approved by group spokes, etc., before it gets sent. So,
Okay, so Councillor Barlow?
4.
Councillor Bourne?
4.
Councillor Ellis?
4.
Councillor Hayter?
4.
Councillor Luxford Vaughan?
4.
Councillor Moore?
4.
Councillor Scordis?
4.
Councillor Willits?
4.
That's 8-4, Chair.
That's agreed unanimously, which is always useful when you're writing a letter to MPs. Good word to use. Okay, so as no one's telling me of anything else we have to do, thank you very much. Apologies for running late over the break. If I do that in future, do please feel free to draw my attention to it. But thank you all for coming through, sitting through that tonight, and thank you all for your contributions, and I'll see you next time. Good night.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
I'll just say good night.
Stopping the live.